Thank you very much and good morning, everyone. I want to call this meeting of the Joint City County Committee to order at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, October the 13th. I want to welcome all my colleagues, all our county commission colleagues, and others who may be with us today, as well as staff. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, everybody. I think we'll begin. It looks like we have a quorum, but I believe we'll begin by calling the roll. Madam Clerk.
Mayor Schewel.
Call the roll.
Mayor Schewel.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Present.
Chair of the County Commissioners, Ms. Wendy Jacobs.
Here.
Commissioner James Hill. Commissioner Heidi Carter. Commissioner Brenda Howerton.
Here.
Commissioner Ellen Reckow.
Thank you.
She's there. She's Reckow is there.
Yep, she's here with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, the first item on our agenda is the approval of the draft minutes. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes?
I have one correction. Give me one moment. I've just.
All right. Have you been able to find it, Councilmember Freeman?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
So it's specific. It's just a comment that I made in the notes. My iPad started updating, so I don't have the page, but I can circle back around with the clerk.
Okay, do you think you could find it before the end of the meeting? Maybe we could approve them at the end of the meeting with the correction.
Yeah, I think the update's done.
Okay.
Oops, asking a bunch of questions. My apologies, technology is a little difficult this morning.
Why don't we do this? We'll hold this until the end of the meeting. That'll give you an opportunity to find the correction.
I've got it. It's
okay,
just,
go ahead.
There was a note in there about verification for nonprofits to be paid, or for for-profits to be paid. I believe it's in the section where we're talking about, hold on, I can take the page. On page 3, under the Family Justice Center, Eviction Diversion Rental Assistance Program. Just a note that I wasn't trying to make sure that the for-profit businesses were being paid. It was actually verification, if that was the case.
Do you mean verification that they were paid?
Yes.
All right.
And noting that, or specifically just noting that they were being paid as for-profit businesses.
All right, thank you. Are there any other corrections or additions? All righty, can I have a motion that we approve the minutes with the addition of Councilmember Freeman's correction?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Commissioner Jacobs, seconded by Commissioner Reckow, that we approve the minutes with that correction. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schewel,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman,
Aye.
Chair and County Commissioner Jacobs,
Aye.
Commissioner Carter,
Aye.
Commissioner Howerton,
Here.
Commissioner Recco.
Aye.
Is Commissioner Hill here?
I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry. And Commissioner Hill.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Commissioner Carter is an alternate. So now that Commissioner Hill is here, we'll scratch your vote, Ms. Carter. All right. Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll now move to the approval of joint city-county 2021 meeting schedule. It's this attachment that was made available to you in the agenda packet. Is there a motion for its approval?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Freeman, I believe seconded by Commissioner Howerton. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schewel, Mayor Pro Tem Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman,
Aye.
Chair Jacobs,
Aye.
Commissioner Hill,
Aye.
Commissioner Howerton,
Aye.
Commissioner Recco.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I forgot to mention earlier, I wanted to appreciate the excellence of the minutes, I believe was done by the county clerk, Ms. Toomer. Thank you for that. We'll now move on to item 3, Data Plus presentation on race and housing in Durham. And I believe that we have several presenters. Dr. William Darity, Nicholas Datto, Omer Ali, and Pei Zhuo. And if we could make them available to be presenting, that would be great. And I see Dr. Darity with us, and I see the others as well. Dr. Darity, welcome. This item is allocated 20 minutes, and so it would be great if the presentation could be held to 10, and then we could have 10 minutes of discussion, but we're glad to see you.
Thank you. Good morning. I would like to ask Dr. Omer Ali to introduce the project and then have our two students, Datto and Paizu, discuss what we found.
Great.
Hi, everyone. Just want to double check that you can see my screen.
We could a moment ago.
Okay, so hold on
Now,
a second.
there it is. Okay.
Okay, so my name is Omar. Thanks a lot for giving us this opportunity to present this work in progress. It's joint with Nick and Pei, who will be presenting, and Sandy. So first, a quick introduction to this project. We started working on this summer as a Data Plus project at Duke. We investigate racial disparities in the trajectory of home values across different neighborhoods in Durham. This presentation links our work to the final report of the Task Force on Racial Equity, which was commissioned by Mayor Pro Tem Jillian Johnson and chaired by Elaine O'Neill and Karen Haldeman. So just some quick acknowledgements before we get started. I want to mention Paul, who helped organize the Data Plus project, and Sandy, who helped advise this project throughout. This is work in progress, so your comments, I think, will help the future trajectory of this work. A quick outline of the presentation. I'll talk about the overview of our findings and how they relate to the Racial Equity Task Force report. Part 1, we'll discuss home values by HOLC neighborhoods. Part 2, we'll talk about home values by census tract. And Part 3 will present preliminary results on contemporary changes in demographics and home values over the past 30 years in Durham. So what are the overview of our findings? Well, first, let me give you a sense of what we did, right? So what we did is we wanted to examine the relationship between race and home values across a number of different units of analysis. In particular, we used addresses, HOLC rating areas, census tracts, all in central Durham. Our overall findings are that across all geographies, we find that home values are strongly associated with racial composition. Historic disparities created by redlining persist today. In a counterfactual exercise that we conducted, we found that in census tracts where African Americans were a majority, home values would have been worth $100,000 more today had they appreciated at the same rate as homes in tracts where whites are a majority. Over the past 30 years, home values rose in Black neighborhoods as they lost Black residents. How does this relate to the Racial Equity Task Force report? Well, there's three places in particular that we feel like our work responds to the requests in the Racial Equity Task Force. So one is in relation to gentrification and the impact of gentrification on wealth. And in response to that, the preliminary work that we will present at the end of the presentation speaks to that, right? As home values rise in Black neighborhoods, they tend to lose Black residents. Second, that there was a request for racial wealth gap data. What we find is that these disparities in home values relate to the wealth accumulation of homeowners across geographies. And in particular, when we know the race of the homeowner, we also find that there's a home value gap there. The counterfactual exercise we conduct suggests that across Black tracts, the average home value would have been worth about $100,000 more today had they seen the same appreciation rates as white tracts. The third place where we feel like we can contribute is the request in the Racial Equity Task Force report to historically trace the effect of race on housing prices and rents. This project does not deal with renters at all, although we acknowledge that this is an important part of housing and an important experience for a lot of Durham residents. However, by only looking at home values, what we can say is that the historic disparities created by redlining persist today.
Yeah, so Omer mentioned this idea of redlining, or this practice of redlining, which was our most recent widespread federal codified racial discrimination in housing in the United States. And it sort of anchored the first part of our research and our first research question, which was how did the trajectory of home values differ by race of homeowner and the HOLC designated neighborhood that home was in 1940. We wanted to be really specific about what homes we were looking at. So like Omer said, we're looking at owner-occupied homes, not rented homes. We wanted to make sure these homes were within the boundary of the HOLC map, and we wanted to make sure that they were unambiguously within one of the HOLC rated neighborhoods. We wanted to make sure they still exist today, so there's still a home there, and that home is the same one in 1940, so it hasn't been entirely rebuilt or entirely re-leveled. And to anchor our findings, we wanted to make sure that we had a sale value between 1997 and 2020, so we can connect it to the 1940 value that we see from the census. And what we find, as Omer mentioned, is significant differences in the amount of accumulated value over time by neighborhood rating. So if you go to the next slide, you can see kind of where we're looking at. This is a map of Durham overlaid with the HOLC districts that were made in the 1930s. And you can see that they're sorted by color. So we have A zones that are classified as best, B still desirable, C definitely declining, and D hazardous. And these zones were proclaimed illegal because they were very much made with the racial composition of the neighborhoods in mind. Overlaid, we have these little green dots, which are actually the addresses we follow from 1940 to today. If we go to the next slide, we can see that once we followed these addresses, we saw some pretty clear disparities even within just the 1940 data. So we could see that homes in A neighborhoods were worth significantly more than homes in D neighborhoods. But perhaps the most interesting part of this section is that those disparities really do continue to today. And you can see that on the right side of the graph. One thing that you can't see in this graph is that even within D-zone neighborhoods, homes owned by white homeowners were $5,000 more than homes owned by Black homeowners in 1940.
Thank you, Nick. In addition to dividing Durham up by HOLC rated areas, we also examined census tracts that comprise central Durham. Of course, census tracts are liable to change every time that a census is taken. Luckily, we're able to obtain data going back to the 1970s that applied to a consistent set of census tracts. Such data is necessary because we use racial trends of the tract in order to categorize it. So there are 3 types of tracts in our analysis: white tracts, black tracts, and mixed tracts. White tracts are those census tracts that remained majority white since 1970, and black tracts are those that remained majority black since 1970, and mixed tracts are include just all other census tracts that didn't fit into the prior 2 categories. Thus, mixed tracts will include those tracts that whose racial majority changed. And so again, we find significant differences in the amount of home appreciation across these categories. And so here's a map of the census tracts that we used superimposed onto a modern map of Durham. White tracts are showing green, black tracts in purple, and mixed tracts in orange. And the dots represent the addresses that we used for this particular census tract analysis. And here's a plot of the home values of these addresses over time. So each connected series of dots represents one address. We're able to collect home values in 1940 and from 1997 to 2020. We were not able to collect any values from the period in between 1940 and 1997. However, we were able to, so even though we don't have data for this 57-year period, we were able to make a guess at their trajectory over this period by extending a line from the 1940 home value to the earliest sales value we have for the modern period. And when we do so, we notice that home values in black tracts have remained very stagnant over this period, only to increase dramatically somewhere in the 2010s. In contrast, white tracts appear to have had a more gradual growth in home values over the past 80 years. And in this plot, we plotted each selling price from 1997 to 2020 as a percentage of the 1940 census reported value. This allows us to see the sales that were made over this modern period for less than the 1940 value of the house. As we can see, a greater percentage of sales in black tracts were made for below their home's 1940 values, indicating that black tracts borne the brunt of depreciation more so than integrated tracts or mixed tracts or white tracts. And to conclude our examination of our sample of addresses, this plot simply shows the average home values across each tract type in 1940 and during the period from 1997 to 2020. Here we see evidence that the disparity between white tracts and black tracts have grown wider in absolute dollar terms. And here we move on from data of our address sample to data collected by the Census Bureau. Specifically, the data is from all the decennial censuses from 1970 to 2000, as well as the 2012 and 2018 American Community Survey 5-year estimates. Again, we can see that the disparity between white tracts and black tracts have grown over time. And finally, to gain a sense of the lost appreciation that owner-occupied homes in black tracts experienced since 1970, we conducted a counterfactual exercise where we applied the rates of appreciation that white tracts experienced to the 1940 average home value in black tracts. When we do this, we find that by around 2016, the average lost appreciation per black home is around $98,000. When you multiply this figure by the number of homes in black tracts, you get to a total of around $70 million in lost appreciation.
So for the last part of our presentation, we wanted to focus on an effect that Pei talked about in his section, where there was a dramatic increase in home values in black tracts in around the last 20 years. And that motivated the research question, how do home values change in the modern period as neighborhood composition changes? We divide census tracts into the same way, and we also filter them in the same way. However, we get kind of a different finding in this section for the modern period, where home values in black census tracts are rising, as Pei showed, but not necessarily the amount of residents are rising. They're actually losing black residents as their home values are going up. So here's an example of the type of data that we have available to us in the modern period. As you can see, it's a lot more granular, and it's really promising to study the effect of gentrification instead of home value accumulation over time. What we can get from this more granular data, even though this is tract data here, is that we see there's sort of an increase in the amount of black residents between 1970 and 2020 in Durham. However, there's a pretty stark drop off or curve back down in the more modern period. And it's interesting because that effect is coupled with what you'll see on the next slide, which is a dramatic increase in between 2010 and 2020 in the value of Black homes in Black tracts. We don't really see this in mixed tracts or white tracts, which experience a gradual increase over time. And here are the two side by side, which is pretty much how we're going to end the presentation, asking people to think about what it means that there's a decrease in the amount of Black residents over time, but an increase in the value of homes in their neighborhoods, and what that means for the city council. So I believe that is it. Thank you. If you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that very interesting presentation. And it was really helpful to have you all explaining the data. When I was looking at it before the meeting, there are a lot of charts and graphs that I was struggling with, but it's extremely helpful to have your explanations. Thank you so much. And I also really appreciate the way you connected it to the work of the Racial Equity Task Force, and agree that it is extremely important to make those connections, and look forward to you all helping us out with some more data around those same issues. Colleagues, comments or questions? I'll make two quick comments. One is, for lay people like myself, it would be good to have the HOLC defined as the Homeowners Loan Corporation. When I was reading it, I couldn't find that anywhere, couldn't figure it out. Also, I want to say the Racial Equity Task Force, while Mayor Pro Tem Johnson was certainly an important advocate for it, was actually commissioned by the Durham City Council. So when you make future presentations with this data, you may want to check that, those two things. Colleagues, questions and comments?
I was going to say exactly what you said, Mr. Mayor, and that the point of clarification that the Durham City Council actually commissions, the Mayor Pro Tem can't commission a study by herself. So just noting that. And then also noting this is timely, and it's a great tool. It's a great tool to acknowledge, I guess, or to actually be able to measure impacts of gentrification over the years, acknowledging that the decrease in the property value. So I don't know if you showed that part, but it'd be nice if you could actually go back and see what the decrease was from the 80s. I think in some of those redlined areas that are like green and blue, you notice that there's a lot more Black tracts moving into that area. So 80s and 90s. And then in like 2000, well, really like around 2010, you start to see it shifting, and it kind of identifies or shows just how much of the Black tract is decreased. And I would note that it's also the timely that that Dr. Henry McCoy at North Carolina Central has been tying some of this to entrepreneurship on the business side in the School of Business. And so I think this will marry well with that work. So thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Commissioner Jacobs.
Well, I just first of all want to thank you all for this great work. Really appreciate it, and it's really, really helpful for us, and I think for the whole community to actually see the data. And I mean, it's amazing to me that you've gone back and really done this granular analysis back to the 1940s, and then thinking about the loss in value of, $100,000 loss in value, and the real impact that has on people's lives. And so I'm wondering, I'm interested in like the policy recommendations that come with that. And I don't know if you all are going to look any further at that. And I guess I'm thinking about something like the land trust model. And, if you all are going to look at homes that have been part of the land trust program, and tracking those change in values. I know that's been more recent, maybe only over the last 20, 30 years. But, what are, I would be really interested in that data. I mean, I know that just from the little bit of data we have in the West End that we've seen, that's where we don't maybe have more stability, but just obviously we need policies and solutions that help protect the the wealth that Black homeowners have. So I'd be interested to hear your all thoughts on what should be studied next.
Sandy, do you want to take that?
Mr. Mayor, can
I'll
I
try.
just add, can I just, before he answers, Mr. Mayor, can I just add to what Commissioner Jacobs just said?
Sure.
If you could, and I don't know if you've even gotten this far yet, but I'd like to hear if there will be any research done, an analysis done around the economics attached to this data. Because it all boils down to economics. So will there be any research around that as well? Thank you.
Commissioner Jacobs, I think we have been constrained a bit in terms of what we've been able to do by our emphasis on trying to identify homes that were actually sold in the interval 1997-2020. I think an alternative strategy might actually be to look at the property tax valuation of the homes as another way of trying to measure their value, although that clearly is not the same as what the market value is that's represented by the actual sale. But that might be another strategy that we could use. With respect to what next steps are, we had not considered your suggestion, but very much would like to give some thought to that and have some further discussion about how we might look at policies that are protective of home values, particularly among Black homeowners. Commissioner Howerton, I'm not sure exactly what new steps we could take that would be of interest to you. I would be glad for us to have a conversation further about what kinds of ideas you have about the questions. So beyond our finding that the differential appreciation between Black-owned and white-owned homes is approximately $100,000, depending on the location of the homes.
Thank you, Ms. Darby. I just housing, it's, the systemic racism is the grounding of it, but also that has such a connection to economics. So I'd love to talk to you about how do we dig deeper around this systemic racism around economics. So we can have a conversation about that. It would be great. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Professor Darity, I would just mention, without him being here, that we have an awesome tax administrator, Dwayne Brinson. And so if I can, if we can connect you, I personally could connect you all to him. And if he's able to be helpful for anything you're thinking about looking at tax values. And he's very interested in this issue. We challenged him with coming up with some creative solutions to address the issue of long-term low-income homeowners being able to afford their taxes. So I would just offer that if that's in the future, that he would be a great person to work with.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Reckow.
Well, I also want to thank you for this study. After I read The Color of Law several months ago, I wondered how the policies that were put in place 60, 70 years ago affected values, and you've shown that with this study. I guess my question is probably the results we're seeing in Durham would also be reflected around the country. And have you seen other local studies like yours that show that we're similar to other communities? And then kind of following up on what Commissioner Jacobs raised, what are other communities looking at doing as a result of seeing a study like this, if that's in fact the case that other studies exist? And is there any national effort, any major think tank, whether it's the Brookings Institute or other groups, thinking about what should be done on a national level related to this?
So there is a major study that Brookings recently did on home value differentials between Black-owned and white-owned homes at the national level, predicated on making an adjustment for structural characteristics of the homes. And they found that, actually, I think they found an even larger differential in appreciation than what we found. But in terms of what policies have been introduced to address that, it's less clear to me. I think I want to pitch this to Omer. I also want to add that I'm not aware of any parallel study that's done what Nicholas and Payi accomplished over the course of the summer. So I'm not sure if we can actually compare our findings with any other city. They may have developed a template for how municipalities might do these kinds of studies in the future. But Omer, I'm sure you might have a comment that would be more informative than mine.
Yeah, so in terms of other studies, there's one study that looks at home values of African American and white homeowners from 1940 to the present in St. Louis. Their sample is much smaller. They find that actually the main message of that paper is that home values in Black neighborhoods declined over the past 80 years or so, while those in white neighborhoods were stable. And I think that has something to do with the fact that St. Louis lost a lot of population. So it's a similar story. I think it's because it's a different city that went through like a different deindustrialization experience, rather than sort of a secular increase in home values that was smaller in Black neighborhoods, or maybe like a stagnant home values in Black neighborhoods and rising home values in white neighborhoods. It was sort of stable home values in white neighborhoods and declining home values in Black neighborhoods. Some of the homes in their sample declined to zero, so some of them were just abandoned. So that's sort of an example of a study that does something similar. I'm not aware of any policy responses. My sense is that this work is still pretty new. The St. Louis study was published in 2019. So we might have to sort of stay put, or maybe we have to come up with sort of appropriate policy responses. I do want to say that the land trust model is very promising. The reason we've refrained from making any policy recommendations in this presentation is because we felt like we didn't have enough leverage on questions about what would the policies, what the impact of the policies would be. But to me, and this is completely subjective, the land trust model seems like it's a very promising model that balances affordability as well as wealth building. There is work ongoing at the Duke Econ department that tries to study this, and I think that would be a natural next step for our research team to look into.
I do want to raise one other issue, because one thing that strikes me, not just in Durham, but in other communities that I'm familiar with, is that unfortunately in our historically African-American neighborhoods, we often find that public infrastructure is not as good as in white neighborhoods. And I wonder what the impact of having deteriorated sidewalks, fewer street trees, parks that aren't kept up as well, et cetera, affect values. Do you have any thinking about that? Because that is one way that local communities could help counter what's occurred by really focusing on improving the public infrastructures. And in fact, I just recently at the Joint City County Planning Committee meeting raised the fact that for our comprehensive planning effort, I think we should really look at some of the equity indicators and map them so that as we're planning for the future, we're actively thinking about it. But now I think we should also layer in your information. But I'm curious what you think about the whole issue of public infrastructure and how it relates.
Sandy, do you want to comment?
No, Omer, go ahead.
I think it's very likely that has an impact. Intuitively, it must be the case that public infrastructure affects home values. How much it affects home values, I don't think I know, and I'm not aware of work out there that sort of estimates the impact of like the additional dollar of public investment on home values.
I think, our study is one that is focused very much on the relationship between home value variations and neighborhood composition, demographic composition of neighborhoods. We don't have any information that we've used or any kind of control for infrastructural characteristics of the neighborhoods themselves. So this is potentially a next step that we could take. But to the extent that the racial composition of the neighborhood has led to differential treatment of the neighborhoods in the first place, then it still links the racial demographics to the outcomes that we've observed. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much, colleagues. We have gone over our time allotted for this important, very important report. Particularly, of course, I want to thank Dr. Darity and Dr. Ali, but I particularly want to thank our students. We really are so inspired by your work and grateful for it. So thank you so much. I know for students, it's a hard time. And so we're just glad that you're not only being able to do your work, but being able to do work that's truly useful for the Durham community. So I know we all feel gratitude to you. Thank you. And we look forward to you all bringing us back some thoughts about solutions. In the chat, a couple of people have put possible sources for you. Just again, want to express my gratitude.
Mr. Mayor, I didn't want to leave on that last note without noting that it's difficult to look at the infrastructure and not acknowledge that that's what drives the gentrification, is that when you do input the new streets or new parks, that the market responds, and the economic aspect of that, where incomes is what can push people out of communities. And so I just want to make sure I tie that back before the students leave. It'd be irresponsible of me not to note that the race equity aspect of this conversation has to be tapped into a little bit more.
Thank you, Council Member. And thank you all for Dr. Darity, Dr. Ali, Nicholas and Pei. Thank you so much. We look forward to what's next. Colleagues, we'll now move to our next item. This is the report on eviction diversion efforts, rental assistance, and other critical forms of assistance for vulnerable residents. Before we do that, though, we have two members of the public who signed up to speak today. One of them on this item and another one on an item I'm not sure. I didn't see what they had signed up for. So I'm going to ask the clerk to help me. Is Irene Lawrence, I see Irene Lawrence is present as an attendee. Madam Clerk, could you make Ms. Lawrence available to be heard, please? Ms. Lawrence, are you available to be heard?
I am, yes. I didn't know I was going to be speaking, but.
Are you good? Are you planning to speak today?
I wasn't planning to, no.
Okay.
I was just attending from the Bull City Tenants group.
Oh, super. Okay. Sorry, just wanted to make sure. I saw you had signed up.
Thanks.
Thank you. And Madam Clerk, could you also make Howard Mochtinger available to be heard? Mr. Mochtinger, can you be heard?
I hope so.
Good. Do you have comments today?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay. All right. Well, eventually, if you would like to be heard, please, you can raise your virtual hand, okay?
Sure.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. We'll now move to our presentation. And I know that Peter Gilbert is here. And I know that Ben Rose and Janeen Gordon are here. And I'm not sure exactly, Peter, are you starting us, Mr. Gilbert?
I'm happy to. I don't know that we had discussed it. That's what I had assumed from the agenda. But Janeen or
Okay,
Ben, if
great.
you all prefer to go first, that's fine with me.
Why don't you go first, Mr. Gilbert? And we're really glad to have you. We have had you all back, both the folks from Durham Social Services and from Legal Aid several times recently, and we know that it's work just to get these presentations together. And so I just want to express our gratitude, not just for the work you're doing, which is so crucial, but for being here with us. So, Mr. Gilbert, the floor
Thank
is
you
yours.
so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, members of the council and the commission. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So I hope that this, did that work?
Yes.
Good. Good morning. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present on this pressing issue to our community. I'm just going to try to give a brief update on the state of evictions during this pandemic. So as you all are aware, there were a number of legal protections for tenants during the pandemic, both at the state and the federal level. Those protections have largely expired. So I won't go through the details, but I'm happy to answer questions on them. But the orders from the North Carolina governor, as well as the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court around partial closure of courts are largely over. There are a couple of lingering effects. The governor's moratorium, which lasted for only 3 weeks during Durham, does have a lingering effect of requiring a payment plan and late fees for June rent only. The Chief Justice still has a standing order which requires landlords to file an affidavit when they file a complaint for eviction as to whether or not they are covered property by the CARES Act. The CARES Act itself was the federal legislation, which I know you all are familiar with, and it had many aspects, but one of the aspects was a partial moratorium on federally subsidized homes. So this is both federally subsidized housing like Section 8 or project-based Section 8 or even low-income housing tax credit properties. But it also affected any property that had a federally backed mortgage, whether that was Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or VA mortgage, or there's a dozen different federal programs that can underwrite mortgages. So the CARES Act may still apply in the limited situation where the mortgage holder applied for a mortgage payment deferment. If they still have an ongoing mortgage payment deferment under the CARES Act, then they're not allowed to file an eviction. And so that's why the Chief Justice still requires that affidavit. But as I said, these protections are largely over. And for the most part, what we're left with is the CDC moratorium. It's called a moratorium. It's not really a moratorium in the way the governor's moratorium was or the CARES Act was. It does not stop landlords from filing eviction cases. It does not prevent the clerk of court from accepting those filings. Courts are still hearing eviction cases, and the sheriff is still executing writs. So there's a misconception, I think, right now that there's a moratorium in place. There is in a sense, and I'll get into how it works a little bit, but it is not stopping evictions from moving forward. So what does it do? Well, it only covers cases of non-payment of rent. It's a new law and it is being litigated right now. Landlords in a number of states have challenged the CDC moratorium. And so it's an evolving legal situation in terms of its breadth and its application. But it operates essentially as a defense for tenants. Tenants have to fill out a declaration and they have to swear under oath to a number of facts, basically that they have lost income or they have had health expenses related to COVID, therefore they can't pay their rent, that they would be homeless if they're evicted, that they're making efforts to pay if they can, that they have applied for any available government assistance, and that they either received a stimulus check or they make below $99,000 a year. There are stiff penalties for these fraudulent declarations. but the courts should not look behind the truth of the declaration in an eviction case to evict somebody for it being inaccurate. There are criminal penalties, however, if it's inaccurate. But essentially, what I want to make clear is that tenants have to know about this declaration. They have to fill it out correctly. They have to deliver it to their landlord, and then they still have to go to court to assert this as a defense to an eviction. This does not at any point automatically stop the evictions from happening. Durham courts are generally not dismissing the cases, even if this CDC declaration has been filed. What they're doing is continuing the cases. When I wrote this, it was often just continuing 2 weeks. It seems more recently that they are continuing them until January of 2021, which I think is more appropriate under the CDC moratorium. So the moratorium essentially says if the tenant correctly fills out this declaration and gives it to their landlord, that they cannot proceed to evict them until after the end of the year. Once again, this isn't rent forgiveness. They still have an obligation to pay any rent or fees that come due, and it doesn't stop the eviction case from being filed against them. And so unlike some of the previous moratoriums, this is really a situation where the tenant really needs legal counsel in order to take full advantage of the defenses provided by the CDC. So I'm going to transition now a little bit into where we are with the filings. We saw very few eviction cases filed in Durham County from April through June due to the prior legal protections. I believe you all were provided with a handout from DataWorks, basically summarizing that evictions have begun to creep up in July and August, with about 200 eviction cases filed in each of those months. There were more than 400 issued in September. So we're many of you may have heard advocates like myself were predicting a tidal wave or a tsunami of evictions. I think we're starting to feel just the first waves of that. We've had some legal protections that have been pushing it back, but now we're seeing, twice as many evictions filed in September as there were in August. Applications to legal aid are way up. I think this is a bellwether of cases to come because we do, through our partnership with DSS especially, we try to resolve as many of these cases as possible before they are filed in court. And so for the first 7 months of the year, we were only getting 35 to 40 new cases each month. And then we had 185 in August and 208 in September. And then we're on track to exceed that again in October. Just to say, we are grateful for our funding through the City of Durham that allows us to represent as many tenants as possible, and especially as they need help in navigating the CDC declaration and the CDC process. It's been very contentious in courts, and landlords have been actively opposing those declarations, halting evictions. Our current capacity is to do about 70 cases a month. So we are at the moment operating at about 2.5 to 3 times our sustainable capacity to assist tenants in Durham. We are trying hard to help as many people as possible, and we have some obligations under some of the funding from the city to the County Department of Social Services to try to assist those tenants as well, but we are well over our heads. As far as who's filing, the DataWorks handout goes into that a little bit. It is done by property. And so what it doesn't show is that there are a number of local property management companies that own properties that are scattered site properties across the city. We see very high eviction filing rates with them that are not reflected in that DataWorks handout. And also, the Housing Authority was historically one of the biggest filers, but we have not seen them filing non-payment cases since the pandemic began. They've filed 1 or 2 cases related to criminal activity or other causes of eviction, but not the large number of cases that we were seeing from them last year and in the prior years. So this is just a chart that shows what I just went over with the data. Again, this is data from the Durham County Sheriff who serves the eviction papers as put together by DataWorks. We saw the steep drop off, of course, due to the legal protections at the beginning of the pandemic, and then it's been climbing back up. We're still not where we were in a typical year. So we've seen about half as many cases filed so far in Durham this year as we've seen in a typical year up to this point. But I'd remind you that half as many cases when the courts were essentially shut down for 4 months of the year is, I think it's alarmingly high, that we've seen even as many as half as many eviction cases as we would see in a normal year, when we weren't seeing them at all, or basically none at all, for about 4 months. The Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court still has orders in place regarding the safe operation of the courthouse. The small claims court, which is where evictions happen, was unfortunately business as usual through most of July and August and September. We saw very crowded small claims court dockets. We regularly saw 50 to 60 cases, sometimes more than 100 cases set for one 30-minute docket in a very small courtroom. These are the smallest courtrooms in the house, in the courthouse. My boss, Ms. Gina Ryman, the managing attorney of the legal aid office, had a good meeting last week about this issue, this concern we had, frankly, for the safety of our attorneys as well as our clients, having these eviction cases held in these crowded dockets in these small courtrooms. And it looks like there's some improvement. They agreed to limit the docket to no more than the courtroom could accommodate, which seems to me the least that must be done. And so if the courtroom can handle 6 people socially distanced, then they could only have up to 6 parties. And they agreed to start using some larger courtrooms for the eviction cases. Yesterday was actually the first day that they used one of the larger courtrooms for the eviction cases, but they well exceeded the capacity of that courtroom. So this is still an issue. They had tenants waiting in the hallway who were not admitted to the courtroom, even though they had a summons, a legal summons that said they had to be in there. So they're standing crowded together in the hallway, waiting to be called on their eviction case. And we had a very large docket that even one of the larger courtrooms was not able to accommodate yesterday. And there were apparent communication issues where the magistrate didn't know that the litigants were present, but being kept out of the courtroom by the bailiff. So this is an ongoing issue that I am very concerned about. Local judges have the discretion to postpone cases until they can be held safely. And that's been made clear by the Chief Justice's order. Many counties, I think Mecklenburg County, are delaying cases more and keeping the docket smaller to make sure that these cases can be heard safely. The last thing we want is one of our tenants or one of our attorneys exposed because of these overcrowded courtrooms. Again, this just shows what I said, that we have about half as many cases filed so far this year as we were seeing in earlier years, and that's consistent with similar counties in North Carolina. I know that Janeen and Ben are mostly going to talk about the available rental assistance, but I want to say that they had some funding, some generous funding pre-COVID. Then we've gotten some CARES Act funding through the state. Some of this is administered through Central Piedmont Community Action. One of the concerns we've had both with this funding as with the funding that we are legal aid is a part of with the city and the county is the time it takes to process the applications. One of the consequences of being overwhelmed, of having so many more cases than we are able to handle with our staff, is that it's been slow to process. So Central Piedmont Community Action has been taking up to 2 months to process applications for assistance and to cut checks to landlords. Our program that we're working with DSS combines the legal review with financial assistance. This is a model program that other cities and counties have been replicating across North Carolina. Definitely had some initial hiccups because what we were trying to do was very ambitious, to concentrate the legal assistance with the financial assistance. We know both are limited, and we thought that by combining the two together, we could have a maximum impact. Took a little while to work out the hiccups, and but I think we're getting there, and I'm real proud of how far we've come. But it does take longer than we would like sometimes to turn around these applications for assistance, and sometimes that can lead to another month being due or to an eviction filing. The current need. So the estimates are between 10% and a third of households in the United States are struggling to pay their rent. Most tenants, a majority of tenant households in Durham, were already cost burdened before the pandemic. So if there are about 60,000 tenant households in Durham, between 6,000 and 20,000 of them haven't been able to pay their rent each month during the pandemic. The average rent, I don't know if you saw the newspaper article in the Independent Weekly last week, has actually increased, but even at what it was at the start of the pandemic of about $1,000 a month, that's 6 to 20 million in unpaid rent for each month of the pandemic. So while the response from our local governments and from the state has been generous, it doesn't come close to meeting the need in terms of unpaid rent. So we're doing the best we can in a real crisis that I only expect to get worse, and we are already overwhelmed.
Mr. Gilbert, thank you for that daunting presentation of that daunting reality and future. And thank you for updating us on that as you have continued to do. And thank you for the fabulous work that you all are doing. Let me just remind everybody that we have 40 minutes set aside for this presentation. We're now, and discussion, we're now 15 minutes into it. And I'll now ask Ms. Gordon and Mr. Rose to please offer your report, and then we'll hear from colleagues' questions and comments.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Right, great. So good morning, everyone, and thank you again for this opportunity to present. Janeen, are you able to share the PowerPoint?
I think so.
Okay.
I think I have the ability to share my screen.
I might have, but I would probably mess it up. Technology challenge. There we go. So I want to just first, I'm going to start us off and just first say thank you to both the City of Durham, our county commissioners, to Peter and Legal Aid. I think this partnership that we have forged has really been one that is unique. We're not used to, in the DSS world, really dealing with housing and eviction diversion. These are services that are typically not handled in the DSS. And the partnerships that we have been able to develop, I think over the last 3 years especially, has really put us in a place where we can at least have some type of a crisis response with this pandemic. So those partnerships are very valuable to us, and we're very appreciative for everyone and their help. Janeen, if you want to go to the first slide, I'll hit that and I'll let Janeen talk specifically about the programs. But this kind of just gives you a little bit of a breakout of our history and how in 2018, when we partnered with Legal Aid and with Duke Civil Justice to begin this program that Peter alluded to, it was a unique partnership that I think is becoming a model across the state. And we were able to introduce funds to this partnership in fiscal year of 2019. We had $90,000 to start to actually assist in with rental assistance while we dealt with eviction diversion. And it helped get households steady and helped them get them back onto a good place so that we could prevent the eviction. In 2020, we were able to increase those funds. We did a little reallocation within DSS, and we got additional funds from the county commissioners to get that pot up to $180,000. And we thought, we're doing great. This is a big step. And then here comes COVID. And we now are in a situation that Peter referred to where we are seriously facing needs that are well beyond the capacity that we have. However, we have been able to, through our partnerships, to at least leverage some federal dollars to help us start the process, and we plan to leverage more. I'm going to let Janeen talk a little bit about these pots of money that we've been able to leverage outside of the county funding and the city-county funding partnership that we have. These grants are definitely providing some initial help, and I joke with Janeen, I've been signing 20, 30 of these a week. So I know this money is getting out there and getting to our folks, which is a good thing. It's not without its challenges though. Like Peter referred to his capacity, we have those same capacity issues in DSS. Janeen's team has been very, very stretched. We know people are frustrated at times. They're having trouble getting through. They're having to wait. We understand that frustration. We're dealing with it and processing it as quickly as we can with our staff, and we are going to be very fortunate we can add some temporary staff with some of this funding as well too. So I'll let Janeen talk a little bit about that from her perspective.
So for our CDBG CV contract that we have with the city, again, as Peter described in his presentation, we have partnered with the city and Duke Civil Law and Legal Aid to provide legal assistance during this situation that we're in the pandemic, as well as financial assistance through the CARES Act. As Peter alluded to, we did experience a number of challenges, not only with the capacity issue with legal aid, but also engagement with clients and making sure that they were following through on their requests. So there's a partnership that we have to make with our clients to make sure that they understand that when they ask for assistance, we can offer it, but we can only offer it if they meet the certain eligibility and criteria in order to receive it. And that eligibility is not a high bar. It's just about getting documentation back to us so that we have an audit ready chart. So basically the CDBG CV rental assistance program is obviously meant for those individuals who may have low wealth, and it's looking for a loss of income related to the pandemic, and it can be used for rent or utility assistance. One of the things about this particular pot of funding is that it's only for city residents. However, most of our clients that come through, I would say between 75 and 80%, are actually city residents. So that's a positive for those. It is capped at $6,000, and it's only able to assist with 3 months, whether that's 2 months in arrears and 1 month forward, or whether it's 1 month in arrears and then 2 months forward. And those dollars really have to really be tied close to the pandemic issue, as well as making sure that legal aid is able to offer some assistance. On top of that, we were recently engaged in conversation and have accepted an opportunity with the HOPE program through the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. The HOPE program is basically the Housing Opportunities for Prevention of Evictions, and they are managing several different pots of money. The ones that we are involved in are another piece of the CDBG CV funds, as well as the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So the difference between that pot of money and this pot of money is quite extensive. One is that it does not have a cap on money. It can help for up to 6 months, whether forward or backwards, also with rent and utility assistance. And I think some of the bigger changes with this particular program is about landlord engagement. It's making sure that it's not just a relationship between the financial piece and the client, but also engaging the landlord in making sure that this stays a safe and stable home for this particular household for the duration of the lease. So I think that's a real important piece, that the landlord isn't kind of left out of the conversation. So once that contract is engaged and we are finished with our training, which is this week, we plan on implementing that as quickly as possible. I should also mention that with the HOPE program, we have to use the $2 million by the end of December 2020. So we also have to engage with 211. 211 is really the portal of entry for the HOPE program. So we're hoping that when individuals need financial assistance in this way, that they will actually start to call 211 instead of DSS directly, just because the DSS phone lines have had its challenges with the influx of calls and needs for appointments. So using the 211 system, we hope will assist that, as well as the fact that 211 is for the entire state. And so they can make sure that the clients who belong to perhaps different counties or jurisdictions can find their way to the appropriate location. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of information about why a client may not receive financial assistance. And I think that this is important for everybody to understand that there is no attempt to deny someone. It's really about partnering with the client to make sure that their needs are met if possible. The real push for us is to be able to say yes whenever possible. So that's kind of the high level view of the funding that we currently have available. We obviously have county funding. We now have city funding with the CDBG CV contract with the city. And now we are also the financial portal for the HOPE program that's run through the state. Are there questions for Ben and I?
Like somewhere in North New Jersey.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Do you want to take your screen down, Ms. Gordon?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your great work. Mr. Rose, Ms. Gordon, Mr. Gilbert, and all of you all. It's so important. And we wanted this on the agenda because we know what an incredible crisis we're facing. And I have no doubt that this tsunami that Peter mentioned is going to come. Colleagues, we have about 10 minutes now for discussion of this item. And so I'll ask first if there are any questions or comments by colleagues. Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know I've said it in the past, but I can't stress it enough. These issues are really impactful, and in the mindset of COVID and in acknowledging just how much is coming out of it, I want to encourage us to look at our calendar. We just passed a new calendar, and acknowledging that we're only going to have the 6 meetings, which are usually about 2 hours or so. It's about 12 hours, but we lose July. I think we need more time for these conversations so that we're not rushing through them, to actually make sure we all get the information and can ask all the questions we need to ask. The rush doesn't feel productive, so to speak. And I'll just start with that. And then just noting, just going back to the housing and evictions and diversions, I just want to note just in general that on the other side of this is the previous conversation we just had about the wealth inequity, and acknowledging that if you're a homeowner who is of color, Black specifically, and your tenant is not paying rent in this eviction diversion, the likelihood of losing your home is increased. And so without that wealth equity aspect addressed, we kind of create a conundrum for anyone of color, well, people of color in general, and Indigenous people who own these properties, that I think is driving what we're seeing here in Durham today, where our ownership rates, I think I heard somewhere we were like 80-something% owned by other people outside of the state. And we're losing our ownership as residents in this community, in addition to our renters. And we've got to find a way to make sure that we're marrying our renters, like our eviction diversion with foreclosure diversion, because I know that I'm really upset to find out in a newspaper that the North Carolina Mutual building is now owned by some organization or business up in New York. And so these are the outcomes that we see on a larger scale, but it's a kind of like we watch it on a small scale with the eviction diversion, and then we watch it on a even larger scale with the homeowner like foreclosures, and then even more is the commercial side. And it just builds up. And when we don't take the time to figure out how to address it on a level that's small enough that we can actually stop this bleeding, we lose a lot of property owners and renters in our community. And that's unfortunate. I'm trying to contain myself. I just wanted to go back to note for the rental assistance. I just wanted to note when you were doing the eviction diversion, is there any way to track whether or not the folks have utilities that are backed up as well, and how we're kind of managing that? And that was kind of to the question that the question I had last meeting when I'm asking about, so this money that we're using from taxpayers is now paying for-profit organizations like a Duke Energy because people have fallen behind in COVID. But I mean, I think it's just interesting that where the lines are drawn and there's no, like, I really need a Gantt chart to keep up, and I'm not seeing it in my mind. But that was one question. And then I also had a question about, does a sheriff have a choice in whether he serves those writs? Because I was wondering, I'm trying to understand if there's maybe like a state statute in place that would kind of override his ability to say, no, I'm not going to serve these writs or not. And then in the courtroom, also noting that's really difficult. And I appreciate the specific note around how if you don't have your courtroom on the summons, that's pretty hard to figure out where you're going. And then if you're just wandering around in the courthouse, that's definitely not helpful in a COVID-19 pandemic. So those are the few that I noted. I'm very glad that the additional 60,000 was added to the funding resource. I wish it could have been more. I'm very concerned that our city is being sold, and and we've got no measure to hold on. So I appreciate everyone's work. I know we're all pushing as hard as we can, but I just want to make sure I note that we've got to push even harder. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Freeman raised a couple of important questions, and maybe we could hear the responses to those, and then we'll get to Commissioner Reckow.
Sure, if you'd like. Do you want to go first, Peter?
Sure. Just the quick questions about the sheriff. Under the previous orders by the Chief Justice and the Governor, the Sheriff Department was able to and did not execute on writs, but there is a statute in place, Councilmember Freeman, that requires the sheriff to execute a writ that is issued within a certain period of time, fairly quickly. And so the opinion of the Sheriff's Association of North Carolina and their council is that the sheriff doesn't not enforce those writs. And then your other question was a good point. The way the summons works for evictions is it just tells you to go to the third floor of the courthouse. And then at one end of the hallway, there is a piece of paper on the wall, and it's sort of divided up with a highlighter that tells you which one of 4 courtrooms you may actually be in. But there is no staff from the courthouse in the hallway to help folks get to the courtroom that they need to be in. Legal aid is in the courthouse almost every morning, if not every morning. And so in between representing our large caseload, we try to assist folks to get to the right courtroom.
With regards to utility assistance, I just pulled up our dashboard on that. And as far as I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. Gordon. I think that was someone who maybe is unmuted that needs to mute. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So I pulled up our dashboard on how much of our COVID CV dollars are being used for utility assistance. And it looks like it's not even 5% of that is being used for utility assistance. It looks like we are using primarily our SIP dollars, our crisis intervention dollars, which has hit almost 200,000 since the beginning of July. So just to put some of that in context, we only get a 600 and so thousand allocation from SIP, and we have already used a third of that to address the utility issue.
And I think it's important too to remind everyone that in addition to the crisis intervention program, they've loosened the rules a little bit in terms of what you need and how you apply. And then we were able to, through the states, I think it was a waiver, they were able to issue an additional low-income energy assistance payment as well, too, recognizing the COVID emergency. So we've been able to get assistance up and above these pots of money that we have for utilities, which is a good thing because the rental is, Peter alluded to, $1,000 a month average rent. We're seeing people come in with $3,000 and $4,000 in rental needs. So the more we can put towards rent, I think the better off we are, and use our other funding to help folks get through the utility gap.
Just a follow-up question. So I noticed you noted that 200,000 has already been used since July. Is there a mechanism in place for you to let us know when you get down to the last 200,000, or is there some plan in place to kind of just make sure you're not running out? Because I feel like that's gonna definitely be an issue.
Yeah, the challenge there is those funds. I mean, they're an entitlement fund, so we have to take applications. Once we qualify, we have to find them eligible. The one we can definitely work to make sure we inform this board regarding our status and our funding. We're happy to provide that. We're obviously, I think the state is seeking additional funding through this process, and sometimes there are reallocations. However, this year with the COVID pandemic, I'm not really anticipating reallocations. And when I say reallocation, that means some counties underspend, so they take it to counties that may, push their limit or overspend. But we're going to continue to push for additional funds there. But we can definitely keep you posted as we do. You're right. We'd not have spent this amount of money in crisis by this time, because crisis is typically driven by health crisis and weather driven. So, and we've had very pleasant weather, so you can see the loosening of the rules is allowing the money to flow out quicker.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Commissioner Reckow.
So I was wondering, in terms of trying to be proactive related to the tsunami of need that we may face in a few months, is there any effort that you're aware of at the state level to try to legislate for some type of required payment plan approach, where there's a deferral? I mean, we in terms of taxes for homeowners are doing that. So what could be done, or what should we be thinking of for the upcoming legislative session or a special session related to this issue?
Mr. Gilbert, would you like to comment on that?
I will briefly. The governor's moratorium, which began at the beginning of June and unfortunately only lasted 3 weeks, did require exactly that. It prohibited charging late fees and other costs and required at least a 6-month payment plan. Unfortunately, that moratorium was not renewed by the governor's office. I know that tenant advocates and others have been in conversation with the General Assembly. And the North Carolina Association of the Apartment Association has opposed those types of recommendations. So I am not particularly optimistic at this point, but I think that it's clear that the governor did it once, and so I don't think the pandemic has gotten better. And so the authority and the power is certainly there.
It seems as though we may want to think about approaching the governor related to, probably once the election's over, but related to getting key players together, representatives of the apartment industry, but also the bankers, because it's a chain reaction, and trying to get everyone to agree on reasonable payment plans going forward, because this is just something that I don't think we're going to be able, unless a huge relief package comes out of Washington soon. It seems as though some other effort here statewide to get people to accept some deferral needs to happen.
If I could just briefly also, it's important to remember that most tenant households in Durham were already cost burdened, were already paying more than 30% of their income in rent and struggling to pay just this month's rent. If a payment plan is certainly better than the current situation where folks face immediate eviction. A continuance or a delay in an eviction is a win in my world. But, these are not generally families who have an expectation of an increased income next year. It's hard to know how long this economic crisis is going to last. And so even a deferral or a payment plan at best kicks the can down the road, which is progress, but doesn't solve the problem. The families that couldn't pay their rent this month aren't going to be able to pay 10 or 20 or 30% more next year when they have to repay this.
Commissioner Jacobs.
Thank you. And we first heard this presentation at the Recovery and Renewal Task Force, and I asked that Peter and Janeen and Ben, that you come before the joint city county, because this is such an important issue. I mean, we've heard the numbers, they're completely overwhelming. I know the mayor has written a column about this. I've tried to raise it as much as I've able to at our board. I brought it up last night, but we're really on the verge of a catastrophe here. And when we think about all of our children who are trying to learn at home, every single issue that we're facing in Durham is tied to housing, the health and well-being of people in our community. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And this is the most basic, essential issue, that everybody needs to have safe, secure housing. We're going to hear next about key economic indicators. Well, why are we having this eviction crisis? Because of our current unemployment rate. The data around Durham's unemployment is that right now, as of August 1st, we have 14.1% unemployment, whereas the state average is actually 5.3%. And it's because of our local economy. When you break it down, 36.1% of our low-wage workers are unemployed right now. And that is compared to 7.7% middle-wage workers. And again, the state average is about 14% unemployment for low-wage workers. So this is the source of the crisis that we have. And we know that these low-wage workers are predominantly people of color. They're tied to industries that are not coming back anytime soon: tourism, hospitality, entertainment, restaurants. So we've got, our economic recovery is going to be so critical, but we're seeing that things are leveling off. So this situation is not going away. We need the funding from our federal government. We need the funding from our state government. We don't need our state government taking $4 billion worth of CARES Act funding, and instead of addressing the critical needs in our state, distributing it in $335 checks to many people who don't need the money. So I think we're going to need a strategy where each of our elected bodies are really sounding the alarm and contacting folks at the state and federal level. And then looking at some solutions that we have locally. I applaud you all, Legal Aid, DSX, Janeen, Peter, the work that you're doing. And this eviction diversion structure we have came out of this joint city county. It's the city and the county working together and collaborating over the last few years that has even put us in a position to respond the way we are. And I want to give also, credit to the city for passing over the CDBG money to DSS to use. And then Janeen, we're so lucky we have somebody with housing expertise who was able to get this $2.4 million worth of HOPE funding. And, I don't remember, Janeen, if you mentioned this morning, but now we're getting money to help administer, which we desperately needed, some administrative support. So we've got $3 million, but as we know from what Peter said, it's a drop in the bucket. One thing I want to ask about, and this came up before, is that Wake County is reaching out. I mean, you kind of mentioned this, Ellen. Wake County is reaching out to their landlords and having conversations with them and working with them. And so we cannot even do this on the local level, trying to see whether they would be willing to work out some type of a deal and work with our renters here. So I guess I would like to hear a little bit more from city council members and the mayor and folks. You know, Peter, you work with landlords. What can we do to start working on that? Working together with our landlords, because as you know, Peter, the CDC moratorium, it's really not going to help us in the long term, because eventually people are going to owe this money. So just want to hear some thoughts from you all about some strategies around that.
If I could just start with an observation, most of the local landlords, the smaller homeowners, I think we're not seeing as many evictions filed by them. I think that many of the landlords who live in our community, not all certainly, but many, understand the crisis that their tenants are in and that this is a shared suffering. And if you look at the handout and the Housing Authority certainly understands that, and other groups understand that. And I think if you look at the data provided by DataWorks, what we're seeing are corporate, financial out-of-state landlords who are proceeding to file rates as if it were business as usual. And it's of course much harder to build those relationships when the entity you're dealing with is incorporated in another state and is really a financial instrument. I can speak a little bit to the Raleigh-Wake County program, because in Wake County, legal aid is actually administering both the emergency rental assistance as well as the legal assistance. So we actually in Wake County are the ones who are making those payments to the landlords through their program. We're able to offer the first stage there. We offer 70% of the balance. And so basically the opening offer for the landlords in Wake County, and we're seeing across the state, many landlords are willing to accept a fractional balance. They're willing to avoid the time and expense of court, get some cash in their pockets now, and to accept a smaller balance that's not a payment on the whole. So we spread out a little bit. And the dollars go farther. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that at all in Durham. We're seeing that's very rare in Durham, where I'm able to have a landlord negotiate and accept a balance that is less than 100%. And the reason is they don't have to. As you saw in that Independent Weekly article, rents have actually gone up 30% since the start of the pandemic. And so whereas in other places, the market has started to shift, and landlords are accepting, cash now as opposed to maybe having to fight in court to get payment later. That isn't something we've seen landlords in Durham be willing to accept at this point.
So I know we're not going to solve this here today, but I would just say I think we should follow up on that and try to develop a strategy around that. The other thing that I want to say is that and we didn't get, Ben, you mentioned this a little bit. It's really important that we're leveraging all of the DSS resources that we do have, which I want to again applaud DSS staff for, but around food and other utility assistance and childcare assistance, as much as we can get the wraparound, all of the other supports to people, then the more funding people will have, hopefully, to deal with their rent payments. And so I think, again, we need to do, I think, better at making sure that our community knows about all of the resources that are available. I think that is something that we can really improve it. And third thing I just want to bring up is around the courts. Peter, you mentioned that there was a conversation with your director and the chief district court judge. Was there a conversation about the issue of that Durham County seems to be only delaying for 2 weeks, and other, for instance, MEC is delaying for longer? Do you know if has been any conversation about that?
There wasn't. It's that's really has to do with individual cases and the law, and we don't there are complicated rules about how attorneys talk to judges about larger issues of legal interpretation outside of the courtroom. And so our conversation was more about the safe operation of the courthouse, and Judge Evans, I think, was very clear with the clerk of court and the others who were in the meeting that the dockets should be limited to what the courtroom can accommodate. And we shouldn't have people waiting in the hallways who it's not safe to have in the courtroom. Unfortunately, that's not what we observed yesterday morning, but we're optimistic that we're moving in the right direction. The CDC moratorium is still being interpreted. There was, in my opinion, a bad court case that came out of Georgia. And the landlord's position generally is that the judgment should be granted despite the declaration. And the only thing that the CDC's declaration prevents is actually the execution of the writ. Our interpretation and what we believe to be the plain language of the order is very different. We think that that eviction is defined in the order as any action that moves towards eviction. And so we think that actually landlords shouldn't even be filing the evictions. But again, this is an ongoing and contested legal issue, and there's not a clear court case interpreting it yet in North Carolina. So more to follow with that.
Okay. And one last thing I just want to mention for everyone's benefit, because it relates to the courts. September 15th, FEMA has come out with new guidelines that does not allow reimbursement for PPEs, cleaning, sanitation, anything related to temperature screening for our courts, our schools, or our detention center. This is going to be a very big issue of concern, as you know, because obviously there are expenses that are related to keeping our courts and our courtrooms safe that you have talked about, Peter. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that change in FEMA guidelines, which is very concerning.
Commissioner Howerton.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Peter and Janeen and Ben, for this report. You know, this is something that's really dear to my heart. And it's over a year ago when we took on putting more money into the eviction, I made a comment that we needed strategies at that point. We needed to be coming up with strategies going forward to what happens when people don't have the money to pay the rent. If we take care of the landlord this month and next month, what happens when he comes back for the dollars next month? So now here we are at a critical space here. And I appreciate what Commissioner Reckow and Councilwoman DeGianna said, that from my perspective, where we need to be right now is the boards sitting down and coming up with strategies and not wait until this emergency we're in the space right now, but it's like, it's coming up the backside of our bodies. And are we going to wait until it overtakes us before we come up with what are we going to do? We can't wait on what Washington is going to do. They're so busy fighting right now that people can be in dire straits before they straighten themselves out, if they ever do. But I think it behooves us to come up with what are we going to do. I just sent a message to Kevin Leonard with the Association of Counties to have a conversation with him about what is happening across the state. Because as a landlord, I have a house in Greensboro just been sitting there for a couple of months now and nobody's in it. And as a landlord, I've got to pay that mortgage. So there is issues on with landlords, and we've got to take care of the tenants. So there's work for us to do as the elected officials in this county. And thank you so much, Mayor. And thanks, Peter, for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I want to again thank Mr. Rose, Ms. Gordon, and Mr. Gilbert for being here with us today and for all the incredible work you're doing. I think my colleagues on the County Commission and Council made really important comments, and we all support your work. I think we know that, I've heard three things from my colleagues. One is we need to continue to develop a local strategy. We've done a lot, but we got to do a lot more. That's one thing. The second thing is, and I see this in the chat from Commissioner Rakow, especially after the election, I can say this, we need a change in our legislature. And depending on what happens in this election, we'll have more or less opportunity to get something different from the state. And then we really, we don't have the money to nearly do any, we can only solve a small fraction of this problem with local funds. We have got to have a change in Washington. We have got to have a major relief package from Washington. Otherwise, we have no chance of meeting even a fraction of this need. So I think that is really important. We got to continue to push on all fronts in that regard. So colleagues, thank you for your comments. I thought they were extremely valuable, and I want to appreciate I really want to appreciate the three of you all and all the people that you work with. You have our ongoing gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you.
Colleagues, we'll now move to our next item, which is equally important, and it's an item that Commissioner Jacobs already referenced, and this is the report from the Economic Recovery Committee of the Recovery and Renewal Task Force. I know that we have Geoff Durham with us. I believe we have Dr. Anthony Nelson from North Carolina Central University, and we may have Susan Amey as well, and there may be others. Geoff, are you all with us?
Yep, we have the team from the subcommittee here, ready to report out. You'll hear from me. I'll pull up our screen and give a little bit of background, and we'll go from there if you guys are all ready.
Thank you. We have 30 minutes allotted for this presentation and discussion, so we're really glad to have you here.
Thank you. Let me just get this cleaned up. All right, we're all ready. Good morning, council members, commissioners, staff, neighbors. As Mayor Schewel mentioned, I'm Geoff Durham. I'm the president and CEO of the Durham Chamber. But today I'm presenting as a member of the Recovery and Renewal Task Force. We were asked early on to create a committee from the task force to discuss economic issues related to the pandemic. Anthony Nelson and Susan Amey are here. You'll also hear from them today, as well as Pilar Rocha Goldberg, Nicole Thompson, and Ed Boyd will be all available for questions after this. And so you'll kind of hear a little bit about some of the work that we've been up to since May. We're pleased that the rest of the task force and hopefully the community is now joining us in recognizing the importance of economic health as well as community health and helping our community get back on the bowl. As well as an opportunity we're afforded right now, a unique opportunity to help growth in Durham better benefit all of our residents. Now, we presented about a handful of times to the task force on our Friday meetings, and we're going to hope to discuss some of those highlights with you all today, and certainly intend on having a number of different follow-up conversations as we continue to learn more. Durham has several different organizations and government departments working on all aspects of economic development. And truthfully, we partner as needed, but we just haven't been coordinated under a central vision or economic plan that everyone can truly get behind. Recovery will require shared plans for both short and long-term efforts. It's also going to require collaboration among city and county officials, local economic development organizations, and services from agencies and organizations working with small businesses and other entities. We are making progress, and we have all been pleased to support this work, but reporting and accountability for all of these activities cannot be owned or managed by a short-term committee. So we're looking at aligning economic development efforts, and we believe that doing so We'll expand the proactive recruitment and attraction of businesses and industries that further diversify Durham's economy. Alignment will fortify and expand support programs for small businesses, including consultation, financial, and entrepreneurial development. And as opposed to just the standalone diversity initiatives, we must make sure that we build all programs and initiatives to be inclusive and equitable and provide pathways and access for communities of color, women, other underrepresented groups, and including language access. Alignment will support and encourage innovative talent development. Short term, we addressed it already, Durham Tech's Back to Work initiative, which we also presented to the task force, and there's numerous other programs also. Long term, a holistic program to address cradle to career workforce preparation with support from local education institutions as well as the business community. Alignment's going to promote resident and visitor re-engagement and support local businesses to help grow the economy and get them back into a hiring mode again. And most importantly, make sure we're tracking how we're doing. And this is where I'll kick it over to Dr. Nelson in a moment. You know, economic indicators are not as readily available as the health data. And so once we hear from Dean Nelson to mention the keys on how we're doing, he'll then kick it over to Susan, who's going to mention some opportunities, and then we'll turn it over to the group for further discussions. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Nelson, and thank you all for having us today and taking part of this important conversation.
Thanks, Geoff, and good morning to everyone. I'll talk briefly about the key performance indicators that we are using to drive our discussions. We look at them as sort of an economic ecosystem. The more consumers spend, the stronger and more profitable businesses become. And as businesses become stronger, the more people they employ. As more and more people are employed, the more employers find a scarcity of employers or of employees, and you get a tight labor market, and therefore that drives up salaries. So overall, the goal is for the economy to return to pre-COVID numbers, and we want those numbers, or when we look at the previous numbers, we generally look back to January prior to the pandemic. And we're trying to get back to those numbers as a country, as a state, and as a county and city. Durham County has lagged slightly in the area of consumer spending, as if you compare it to North Carolina overall. It's about 14.8% down from January, as compared to North Carolina being down 4.6%. When you look at the small businesses, many individuals say that small businesses actually drive the economy more so than the larger businesses. The North Carolina in general has been doing better as the country than the country as a whole, and that's also sort of a mirror image of Durham County. When you look at the percentage of change in small businesses that are open, we're down. We're doing well in the retail and transportation sector, but in terms of leisure and hospitality, we're way down. We're down about 36% in terms of the number of small the number of small businesses that are open. That is the most dramatic increase among all of the sectors, and they've borne the hospitality and leisure sector has borne the brunt of this economic downturn. When you look at employment, overall employment, the percentage change has been dramatic, especially in the area of hospitality and leisure. We're down about, I'd say, 19.6% off of January's numbers. We experienced about almost 9,000 losses in jobs in Durham County in the leisure and hospitality sector. When you look at the employment numbers, when it comes to low and middle income workers, it's been devastating. Chair Jacobs referred to the percentage. If you compare it to January's numbers, we're down 36% in employment for low wage workers. That's workers who make $27,000 or less. And as many would say, the poor have gotten poorer and are not experiencing much of a recovery. So overall, the economy is better than it was in March and April at the height of the pandemic, when we were really hemorrhaging. Although some parts of the economy may be out of the hospital, other parts like the low-income workers are still in need of intensive care. So in essence, there's still a lot more work to do. So these are some of the key performance indicators that we have been honing in on. But the main question is, what do we do? How do we positively impact and expedite the economic recovery? And how do we get more people to spend money? How do we strengthen our businesses? And how do we help some employees who have been laid off pivot and redirect their efforts and reskill so that they can get jobs in other areas. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan, Amey at this point in time, but thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nelson, and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all about what we've put together after testing and safety protocols and PPE and many of the other things that we are trying to provide for our small businesses in Durham. What they need most is business. They need revenue. That's a function of product and service development, of marketing and promotion to inspire consumers to spend money. And it's not the normal function of government, but as we've discussed, these are not normal times. And we recognize our government absolutely has to provide support to people who are struggling, the ones in need of food and stable housing. We also need to be figuring out how we can support economic recovery and the return of revenue to our small businesses in Durham. And as Dr. Nelson mentioned, and we've discussed, the impact on many of our hospitality and leisure businesses who are small businesses based in Durham has been the greatest of the impacts on all others. And they also are the part of our industry that supports many of our lower wage workers. So this is a group that really needs our support. This Economic Recovery Committee spent a great deal of time, as you've heard, looking at what are the key drivers of economic recovery, what do we need to be doing, and where could we as a community invest to try and help them build back. We've developed our proposals in collaboration with many of our small business owners through the roundtable process that's associated with the task force. We've debated these in many different ways. And one of the things that's important for you to know is that the proposals that we've put forward can all be done incrementally. And what that means is that they can be funded on a month-to-month basis, and we can see which proposals yield the kind of results that are needed and are going to help drive our economy back. And we can make shifts in how we fund these over time to the ones that are producing the best results. So we've created a number of approaches to how to help recovery come back. The small business consulting and training is one we talked about in our presentation 2 Fridays ago to the Recovery and Renewal Task Force, where we heard directly from some small business counselors who are working directly with owners on updating their plans, on budgeting, on what funding opportunities are available to them, on starting new operations, or in one of our favorite terms in this pandemic, pivoting to other things, and how to offer other services. Those small business counselors are receiving some additional outside support currently, but we may need to look into how to prolong and amplify their impact over time. And that's what we refer to in number 1 here, the small business consulting and training. The next 4 related to specifically to hospitality-oriented businesses and leisure businesses. The first one, Durham Delivers expansion. Durham Delivers is a program that is going on right now and is helping keep some of our restaurants afloat. Expenses that are associated with this proposal are about managing the logistics of the project and promoting it to get consumers out. This is one that has already had some great success, and we are looking to expand it and keep it going, recognizing that the recovery is going to be a much longer effort than we expected even a few months ago. The next one is the Rediscover Durham package development and promotion. This is designed to spur consumer spending, which is down almost 15% in Durham as we go into the holiday period, by creatively packaging some experiences that generate cash for businesses now up front for things that consumers can take advantage of later as they feel safe going out. The next one, festival and event recovery. Festivals and events drove almost $20 million in economic impact pre-COVID in Durham. We are a community that loves festivals and events, and they touch all parts of our community. But these event owners, recognizing they can't operate right now, but trying to look to the future and what it will take to come back, they're going to need help with equipment that helps mitigate risk and provide support for safe engagement. Things like outdoor tents and heaters and fans and pedestrian traffic control and hand sanitation stations. And they plan these events many months in advance, so we need to tell them now what kind of support is going to be involved later so that those events can come back in this, possibly over the winter and certainly in the spring. And the Small Business Marketing Co-op program is one where marketing expenses are often the first to get cut in difficult times. And what we want to do is help our businesses market themselves to generate traffic and revenue. And we will support them with digital marketing planning and expertise. And this program calls for grants offered to small business owners. Throughout all of these proposals and our discussions as a committee, we've been very focused on how do we make sure that we not only offer support and programs that benefit those who are already innovative and creative and coming forward proactively, but in an effort to make sure that we are driving equitable access to economic recovery aspects. Each of these plans has in place some very intentional ways of trying to reach out to businesses across Durham County to make sure they know about these resources and can engage. So there's been a huge focus throughout. One of our key tenets in this is not to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative within this, but to make sure that permeates each one of these, and that's built in. So I know we don't have a lot of time to get into the details of these proposals, and that Ryan Smith will be talking about them more in the next agenda item, but we are happy to answer any questions or schedule one-off discussions if we need to provide more detail. So thank you. And yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Amey. Thank you, Dean Nelson and Mr. Durham. I think now if you could take your screen down, we'd like to have a discussion. Thank you with council members and commissioners. I want to also suggest that you all gave a more detailed presentation with more slides rather to the Recovery and Renewal Task Force that included a lot of statistics on specific, our job loss statistics and so forth. I think it would be great if you were able to share that with all the council members and commissioners, sometime soon. All right, colleagues, who has some questions or comments? We also see Ms. Rachel Goldberg here, and I think you said Mr. Ed Boyd might be here as well, but we're glad to have you. Colleagues, questions or comments? I'm going to start with Commissioner Reckow.
Well, thank you for your work. I really appreciate the work that's been coming out of our partnership with the business community and the roundtable. A question or an issue I'd like to raise is I feel that getting some more in the way of corporate support for these initiatives, particularly the last thing that Susan presented around helping with the whole issue of our keeping our community vibrant. And that, of course, is what attracted a lot of the businesses to our community. And I just recently read an article about how the major companies in Seattle have stepped up to contribute to the pandemic response. And while a lot of our businesses are hurting, there are major corporate, major companies in the biotech arena, other that are doing well. And I just wondered, Geoff, if we could reach out and try to have a more of a public-private response to these needs.
Well, that's a great point. And I will say that through my work on the Accelerating Digital Equity Campaign, through our work in talent development, specifically now focused on retraining displaced workers, I'm really proud of the larger companies in Durham and how they've stepped up to address issues like the digital equity issue I had mentioned before too. The discussions with that side of Durham's economy are consistent and ongoing, and there's been a really fantastic response in trying to figure out where they can best plug in to help support some of those initiatives, like we had highlighted with the small business recovery and small business resiliency piece, and certainly making sure that we can ensure an equitable recovery, but it starts with one person at a time, and sometimes it's a student, and that student can affect a household. That household becomes a neighborhood. So please be assured that we are actively engaged with the business community and asking them to step up and help us in any way. And the turnout thus far has been good, and we're going to continue efforts there.
I'd like to
Thank
add,
you.
This is Nicole Thompson. I'd like to add, let's not overlook the smaller businesses who own property, who are giving significant reductions and deferments on rent for some of these small businesses, restaurants, entertainment, shops. I speak mostly from the downtown, but they are giving, perhaps not to a fund that has been established, but they are being very cooperative. Not all of them. I'm certainly not saying it's 100%, but the majority stepped out almost immediately in March, working with the small business community that, you're correct, is so much why some of these larger companies have come into Durham. So I would say let's not overlook that they have been giving, just not publicly. And I would say the conversations that I've had with some corporations, those are the ways that they are looking to help, more so than a money into a fund. That's not to say that they wouldn't do that. And certainly, as Geoff said, they have stepped forward with things around education and workforce. But please let's note that some of them have been doing things to help the smaller businesses.
That's a great point, Nicole. And if I could kind of jump on that a little bit, we usually do a first responders and a community champions appreciation event. This year we pivoted that, and we were able to provide meals to a number of our community champions, and that all came through corporate sponsorship. So in total, we spent over $15,000 on 30 local restaurants and provided over 1,000 meals to help support that. That's a small example, but just sort of so you can understand where our mindset is about how we can have some of these larger organizations underwrite some programmatic pieces to help assist small businesses.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions and comments. Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the presentation, and I think it circles back around to the whole conversation we were having with the two previous presentations and acknowledging how all of this kind of marries together. And I'm concerned around the connectivity in the conversations because they're happening in silos, and acknowledging that with COVID, they're not in person. I would like to have a really robust way to make sure that people know where to find the videos and audio And so I'm speaking specifically to staff and acknowledging that I've had a chance to attend quite a few of the task force meetings, but I haven't seen any of the roundtable meetings posted, or I don't know where they're happening. And so I'm sure I'm not the only one. And so I just want to make sure that the community is seeing that, because that will improve connectivity. So also acknowledging I work for a nonprofit, and that nonprofit is not directly tied to business, but acknowledging that we're doing 2 generational supports for families. We're doing workforce support for the children, and then we're also doing workforce support for the adults. And if you don't know that, there's no connection in how we're working together as a community. I just want to continue to say that if we're not supporting our local owners, business owners, homeowners, and in this work, that we're going to miss having the opportunity to support them in ways that do provide deferred rental. I'm not putting anything against ownership from out of state, but I do prefer local ownership. And I think we should figure out ways, that should be a part of the strategy, is to figure out ways to make sure that there is a lot more local ownership. The reports from both the students this morning and from DSS and Eviction Diversion show just what's happening in housing, and the same thing is occurring in commercial real estate and commercial businesses as well. And I just wanted to note that there was one more thing, I'm sorry, that this harkens back. So I know we didn't do announcements this morning, but I do want to make sure that folks are aware that elections start very soon. And elections have started, and early voting will begin, I want to say, on Thursday. And I want to make sure that folks are aware that this is the time, and encouraging folks to make a plan and make sure that they're getting out here and voting, acknowledging that all the things we've been talking about will come down to our state legislature and our federal government. And it's important to make sure that you're voting your interest, acknowledging what is needed in our community right now. Aside from that, I'm going to allow other folks to speak, because I said a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Commissioner Jacobs.
Thank you. And again, I had asked for this to be come before this body, because the work that is going on in the Recovery and Renewal Task Force is so important. And I want to acknowledge you, Councilmember Freeman. You come to so many of our meetings. I see you putting comments in the chat. I really appreciate how engaged you have been. And I agree, we need to make sure that that information is getting out to the community. I actually have asked Ryan Smith to create a website or a Facebook page where everything can be centralized, all the information, because we need to be getting that information out to the community and the roundtables. I want to thank the Economic Subcommittee, Dean Nelson and Geoff, Pilar, Susan, Nicole, Ed Boyd from Evictus, everyone who's been they've been meeting every week since May. I mean, it's incredible the work that is going on. And I want to acknowledge Pilar, who's very involved with the vulnerable communities and also the immigrant and refugee roundtables, where a lot of this work is coming up from the community. I want to acknowledge some of the questions that have been in the chat from Howie Mockinger was wondering about the role of the community. And so Pilar, I'm going to ask you in a minute to respond to how the community has helped inform really all of these proposals. And just to say that we are really fortunate in Durham. We know we've seen the impact on low-income workers in this sector of our economy, but we are still creating jobs in Durham. We know that we have a growing life science, biopharma, tech, medical technology sector. We still have economic incentive deals coming before us. So compared to other places in the country, we are fortunate. And so I just think we've got to support our small businesses and follow up on these strategies that are coming to us from the community as best we can. And we've also got to keep focusing on the strategy that Geoff talked about, which is all of us aligning on our education to workforce pipeline and focusing on these, 9,000 unemployed workers, low-wage workers that, you know, redirecting them, reskilling them for these high-paying jobs that we do have in Durham County. And so that's going to be really critical that we have this multi-pronged strategy. Pilar, if you could talk a little bit about the community role, and I just want to, maybe you could talk about the Community Health Ambassador Program, because that's a way to support our small businesses and came out of what we heard in the community, and also, and how that will involve the community. And then the Let's Get Back on the Bull campaign, which is again about supporting our workers and our small businesses. So I'll let you respond to those.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having us today. Yes, we've been working with the task force, with the different roundtables, committees, and other groups to involve the community. And being part of the community as a nonprofit, I know we are still need to do more to include more community members, and we are always open to hear other ways to involve more community members. But we've been having, as I said, these different roundtables where we hear from everybody, and there are multiple roundtables and committees. And from those, we've been hearing from the community what are the needs. And these proposals are not only proposals, but other activities that have been going on. As Commissioner Jacobs mentioned, that the Back on the Bull campaign, we've been involving the community in many, many different ways, even putting there some community artisans for masks so they can sell the masks. So we are trying to connect everybody, businesses, opening safe, and trying to be community oriented. So we are trying to involve everybody in these initiatives. With the health ambassadors, we've seen we started visiting businesses and see how we can support them to open safely for the community so they can really start recovering in this pandemic. And it's how the Health Ambassadors Initiative came. And I guess we are going to talk more about that later in the agenda. But it's all these initiatives are coming from the community to support the community. And again, as I said at the beginning, I know we could do more. And I think is what Geoff said at the beginning. We need to have an inventory of what is out there and how we can connect everything. And it needs to be involved city and county. And not only few people in a committee. It needs to be connected so we can really take advantage of the resources that are out there or find more resources. So I don't know if I answered the question, but and again, we always have this conversation, believe me, in a lot of our committees is how we can continue bringing more community members to really have a sustainable recovery. And again, not going back to where we were before COVID, because we know all these disparities for minorities, but how we can go back to something that is better. And I think the intent is there, but we are still a small group of people, so we need to really have more input to be able to make it happen. And I know also in these conversations, even I'm involved with the community, I'm learning a lot about what the NIS is doing and these other events they are doing to bring the community. We had a survey for all the community members to learn about their needs. So there is a lot going on, and probably we need to work more in connecting everything that is going on.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rocha Goldberg. And El Centro has done such a fabulous job during this time. I just want to thank you again for your leadership. It has been amazing. Really, truly has. Commissioner Howerton.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's see, okay, I didn't know if I had my volume on or not. I wanted to go back to what Pilar said, and also back to what Geoff mentioned earlier, that when you talk about the economic recovery, this is a larger conversation than the task force can undertake. And I heard that from Geoff. I've heard this from Pilar. This is a community large conversation that I think I've heard Councilwoman DiGiovanna said the same thing, is there's so much out here, and and all the people in our business community, that 3/4 of the community has no idea about these conversations. And they have so much that they could provide as far as knowledge. And I would love to see this conversation with Geoff and the chamber undertaking a larger, a wider view of this conversation. And all these folks work. They can't engage in this conversation all day because they have other responsibilities, I'm sure. So how do we broaden this conversation that it encompasses a bigger segment of the community? And I know you have different people, different groups talking to different people, but I still believe that it needs to be a bigger segment of our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Other comments or questions at this time? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you everyone for being here and for your presentation. I just wanted to ask about how y'all are keeping up with the evolving and it feels like ever-changing news about the COVID pandemic. There's been a couple of studies that I've read recently showing that restaurant transmission is a growing issue of concern. The new details about the virus being airborne and the surface transmission that we've encouraged people to avoid by things like lots of sanitation of surfaces is now maybe not as big a concern as we thought, and it's more about ventilation. So like, how are y'all keeping people up to date and keeping the community informed about what measures are most important for businesses to be taking? And in general, like, just how are you bringing the science and the new knowledge that we're getting about the virus into the decision making that you're doing as a board?
Early on, I'll speak. I'll start the conversation. Early on with the restaurant roundtables, we brought in an engineer who talked quite a bit about the need to look at ventilation systems of buildings, especially the older buildings that tend to permeate downtown Durham, but also other parts of Durham, and how to go about doing that. The cost of going in and reconfiguring air filtration and ventilation systems is substantial. These conversations were probably May, and while there is quite a bit of interest from the restaurants because they too understand it, the ability to find that money to do that work while they're also trying to keep their staff as whole as possible and pay rent, even the deferred rent that they're paying, it just is a challenge. The answer to that was the streetery that we did to try to bring people outside of the restaurants and have them able to eat outside, and then expanding that. Unfortunately, we just don't have the capacity to do that throughout the downtown area, and certainly not all of Durham. But other places have private areas and private parking lots that they could expand in if they'd like. But that has been one way that we have tried to help with the science, understanding that I too have read, and many of the restaurants have read, that a lot of folks are tracing back that they might have picked up the COVID virus in a restaurant. It's a matter now of what do we do about that? And I'd agree, maybe the conversation isn't so much about let's buy hand sanitizers and gloves and masks, though masks, but not the other things, but really the bigger infrastructure costs, and how do we try to help businesses and property owners fix that issue and the cost. And the engineer that we brought in said that he would be willing, and I haven't spoken to him in a few months now, he'd be willing to come in and kind of do a quick little evaluation of what that looks like in some of the restaurants. But how we go about really making that happen, and then following up with the necessary work that might give people a comfort level to go back inside. And we're really now running against lack of time. Everyone now is thinking about what happens when winter comes. I think retail shops are a little bit different. You can walk in and walk out quickly. Restaurants are a bit different, for the experience and to enjoy the food and to eat the food, it takes a little bit of time. So we are considering that and trying to do the things that we can in order to help. But what we're facing now is people not able to eat outside, even with portable heaters. I mean, who wants to sit outside under a propane heater when it's 30 degrees? How do we help them try to make customers feel comfortable to come back inside and eat?
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Would anyone else? Any questions or comments? Councilmember Freeman?
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to make a comment in saying that I really appreciate the opportunity to hear all of the creativity that's been going on, which is why I want to share as much as possible with folks in the community, because I know that I have a bullhorn to share it as well. But I really appreciate, I know I don't know, Friday or Saturday, I had a chance to go by the BPAC and see the movie on the field. And I thought that was a really phenomenal idea. It hasn't really taken root yet, but I think over time it will. And acknowledging that we have to be really creative about how we do these things, because we will need an economic engine moving through this COVID pandemic. And however it operates, I truly want to tip my hat to Nicole with DDI and staff in the Back on the Bull. There's been some really great ideas coming out of this, and I mean, just the eatery, and there's just so much. We need to have this move across the city, because the businesses that aren't downtown are going to suffer. And I want to stress that many of those businesses that are not downtown are of color, and that race equity aspect of this conversation has to be included in this conversation as well. I know that we don't have the funds to do it all, but we have to push. And we have to know what those numbers look like. And so it's going to be important for us to have actual numbers on how we could provide those types of support in other communities outside of downtown. I'm specifically thinking about that I serve on Women in Municipal Government as the president for the North Carolina League of Municipalities, and speaking to council members across the state. They're all seeing these issues and they're looking to Durham, and they are all taking note of what we're doing here in Durham. And they're very excited about the opportunities we provide, the chance we give them to see what it could look like, and the data that we provide and the information we provide, because it is COVID and most of this is recorded on YouTube or Facebook. Making that available across the state is important. And so noting this is not a red-blue issue. This is we live in North Carolina. What can we do to improve our outcomes economically and for housing? And I just want to make sure that I do note that. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Thank you, colleagues. We have this is not the, we're going to hear in a minute about some of these specific proposals, but I wanted to respond with appreciation, not only for the good information, the fact that you all are now going to be tracking these through KPIs for our whole community, key performance indicators, but also that you all have put forward these specific proposals. And I really feel like we've got to make the Durham Delivers go soon. That seems like one with such an immediate payback, and we already have good experience with it. But appreciating all of you all, and thank you so much. Any final questions or comments for our economic recovery group? Thank you all so much again for being with us. Thank you for all the work you're doing. And as you can see, there's a lot of interest and support for your work, and just want to express all of our gratitude. Thank you so much. We're now going to go into a related conversation. Our next agenda item is the report on the progress of the COVID relief work jointly funded by the city and county, and upcoming funding requests, which includes some of what we have just heard. And I'm going to turn to Ryan Smith, who's who staffs our Recovery and Renewal Task Force, for his report, and then we'll have discussion. There's several proposals here, and I've asked Ryan to go through all of them at once, and then we'll have the questions at the end, unless there's something that really compels you to go ahead and get in ahead of time. But Ryan, why don't you go through all the proposals, and then we'll talk about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Schewel. Good afternoon, everyone. Ryan Smith. I work for the City of Durham. Normally, I'm the Innovation and Performance Manager, but currently I'm on special assignment, as Mayor Schewel mentioned. I'm going to provide an update on 4 different jointly funded city-county initiatives. And then we are also joined today by leaders of each of these initiatives who will be available to answer follow-up questions. I'll provide a very quick high-level overview of where we're at, and then at the end of that, we'll pause for questions. So today I'll be providing an update on 4 initiatives: the Back on the Bull campaign, which you heard about briefly before, also the Community Health Ambassadors program that is attached to Back on the Bull, the Durham Small Business Recovery Fund, and Hope Learning Centers. I'll start with the Back on the Bull campaign. I would like to again thank Discover Durham, Susan Amey and her team, especially Margaret Pentrak, who is playing an important role in organizing this work. They are volunteering their time and their talents to advance this, this important campaign. As a reminder, Back on the Bull is a public health campaign that was designed to better position our community and our businesses to voluntarily comply with evidence-based public health practices to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission. The city has put $146,000 towards the lifting up and marketing of this campaign that has been joined by $100,000 from the county. The campaign itself, the website and the health and safety checklist were all created pro bono by community partners at Duke and McKinney. Would like to thank them again for their contributions. The funds are all committed to actual advertising and marketing and printing materials. None of them are for staff time or the time to administer this work, the time to do the media placements. All of that has been donated by Susan Amey and her team. And we do have some city and staff support as well. And I'd like to thank Shannon Delaney on my team, who is helping with some of the creative design for this information. The goal of the communications plan is to raise awareness broadly in our community about the Back on the Bull campaign and to increase the number of establishments, both businesses, nonprofits, and others that are participating in this campaign. Participating in the campaign means that a business has gone through a planning process, an online health and safety checklist that it's available in English and Spanish, and that they have made public the commitments and the steps they are taking to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission. And we believe that this type of transparent communication of the steps our businesses and other establishments are taking is really key to inspiring confidence in our consumers and doing so in a way that, again, is rooted in evidence-based best practices. One thing I'd like to stress is that the campaign, the communications plan developed by Discover Durham, identified 24 media outlets that the marketing dollars are going to, and 13 of those specifically focus on reaching out to minority audiences. I'm just going to briefly, the team has been very busy. And again, a lot of thanks to the team. We're also, this team meets every other week and is joined not only by folks from the city and county and from Discover Durham, but also from Duke, from NC Central, and other communications experts in our community who are volunteering their time to support the strategy around this. They have been busy with print materials and local news publications, in social media. Again, you have this in detail, so I'm just going to go through to give you a sense of the work that has been done to date. In digital advertising, and again, you'll see a consistent commitment throughout this to be communicating in both English and Spanish. There have been television advertising on WTVD, WRAL, and Univision. And some of the links that you received in advance, you can actually watch some of those videos, but I will not, in the interest of time, show them today. Radio, and then other ways of communicating. So we have, for example, a bilingual flyer, that insert going out in the water bill this month. We're using billboards. We have advertising on our Go Durham buses, not only about the campaign, but reminding individuals on our buses about the importance of wearing masks and wearing them in a way that covers your nose and mouth, and then in printed flyers. We also, in addition to these paid forms of advertising, are working with our partners around the table on this communications team to use all of their various ways of reaching out into the community. This includes city, county, it includes the chamber and others who are all using their own channels to lift up this work and to encourage individuals to participate, encourage residents to check out the website to learn about residents who are making these businesses that are making these important commitments. In terms of tracking initial metrics for the marketing campaign to date, the advertising that has been put out has led to 7 million impressions. And again, Susan Amey will be available to answer specific questions you might have about that. Over 20,000 unique visitors to the Back on the Bull website, and 241 establishments that are currently participating in the Back on the Bull campaign. Of these participating businesses, 28 are Black owned, 14 Latinx owned, 101 are women owned, and 11 are LGBTQ owned. I will say on the Durham establishments, we think that the communications campaign is one piece of a strategy. It is necessary, but it is insufficient to get more and more businesses to participate, which is really what leads me to the next update, which is an update on the Community Ambassadors Program. Community Ambassadors, this is in-person support to Durham establishments, in-person visits, designed at capacity to be reaching 100 to 150 Durham establishments every week. And the goal of this is to provide support to businesses in order to help them to comply with best public health practices. I think Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, in one of your questions about how we are staying up to date, this is one of the strategies, engaging public health experts and having on the ground support to businesses to keep them up to date on the things that they need to do in order to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission to their employees and to their customers. Also to Councilmember Freeman, this is also one of the strategies for how to ensure that more individuals are aware, more business owners are aware that we are specifically reaching out to minority-owned businesses, to Black and brown business owners, to make sure they're aware of this, to make sure that they have the supports that they need, to make sure that they have PPE and face masks. So this is a really important strategy, and we believe that it will also help increase the number of businesses that are participating in our signature voluntary compliance program. The program has already secured 75,000 face masks that they will be distributing. And then an update on where we're at. So University of North Carolina Gilling School of Public Health is administering this program and have a subcontract with El Centro Hispano that will help with hiring some of the ambassadors. In September, they conducted a small pilot with some businesses to better refine the model and to also give us very helpful feedback on how to improve the health and safety checklist. And you received a detailed PowerPoint that shared some of their findings, and we are working now to incorporate those recommendations. We will have, based on the latest report I got yesterday, by the end of the week, 6 ambassadors will be on board. Of those 6 ambassadors, 3 are Latinx residents, 2 are African-American Black, and 1 is white. And Kurt Ribisil is joining us from UNC to provide more update and answer questions. There will be additional ambassadors hired, but right now we're going to get these on board, and there will be training, and they will be out visiting businesses starting hopefully next week. Again, we'll pause for questions at the end. Now I'd like to talk about the Small Business Recovery Fund. We are joined today by Andre Pettigrew, Director of Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and Brian Smith, who will be available to answer questions. At a high level, just to remind you, the city, county, and Duke have all joined forces to create a $2.8 million small business recovery fund. $1 million of that is grants, and $1.8 million is loans. As of October, the program has funded 150 Durham businesses and given out approximately $1,440,000 in distribution through the grant and loan programs, and that the majority of businesses that have received support through the grant and loan programs are minority or women-owned businesses. Digging a little deeper into the grant program, just to remind you, the eligibility for this is businesses with a maximum revenue of $500,000 or below. To date, $950,000 of the $1 million in grant funds have been distributed. This has been very popular and successful. 131 businesses have received those grants out of 239 applicants. The average award amount is $7,500. The maximum amount of a grant that a business could get through this was $10,000. 56% of grants have gone to women-owned businesses, and 62% of grants have gone to minority-owned businesses. And the primary industries supported through this are food and hospitality, arts, entertainment and recreation, service businesses, and retail and trade. on our loan program. These are available to businesses with revenue up to $5 million. During the course of this, the loan eligibility has been tweaked to enable more businesses to apply and participate in this. They increased the revenue from, I believe, 2.5 million to 5, and increased the number of employees from a maximum of 25 employees to up to 50 to enable more Durham businesses to benefit from this important loan relief. 19 businesses have been approved to date, and $490,000 out of the $1.8 million in loan funds have been distributed. The average, sorry, loan, not grant, that's a typo. The average loan amount is $29,000. The maximum amount eligible, the maximum amount of a loan that you could get is $35,000. 58% are women owned who have received loans. Again, sorry for that typo, and 68% of loans have gone to minority owned businesses. And again, we'll have time to hear follow-up questions with Andre and Brian afterwards. Finally, I'd like to provide a brief update on Hope Learning Centers. To remind you, Hope Learning Centers are a collaborative initiative between DPS, the YMCA, Student U, Kate's Corner, and the Durham Public Schools Foundation that creates safe, supportive spaces for students to access online instruction, but to also receive social and emotional supports and 2 meals a day for those students who cannot do so for various reasons at home. Durham County and City have both contributed to this. The county $405,000 and the city $338,000 to support up to 338 students to provide free access at the YMCA, Student U, and Kate's Corner. The eligibility, these free sites or these free spaces, there have been questions about eligibility, so I wanted to clarify this. Students who are eligible if they are experiencing houselessness or in transitional housing, if they qualify for free or reduced price lunch, if they have parents who work in essential jobs but are not able to have children at home, if they have parents who have become unemployed due to COVID, are part of the foster care system, or they live in the Durham Housing Authority. Any one of those would qualify a student for free access to the learning centers. An update on enrollment numbers. Currently, the YMCA is at 59% of enrollment, so 89 out of 150 spots filled. Student U at 77% of their enrollment capacity with 83 of 108 slots filled. And Kate's Corner at 100% capacity with 80 out of 80 slots filled. The partners are working with DPS on a number of strategies to maximize capacity of this. These include an online enrollment system, partnering with DSS and DHA staff to make sure that they're identifying and enrolling students who would really benefit from this opportunity, and creating a resource guide in English and Spanish that is being distributed to community partners to, again, raise awareness and make sure that our students most in need of this opportunity are aware of it. We will be receiving monthly reports. The first of those reports will come out this Friday. The reports will include detailed enrollment data, attendance reports, reports on efforts to date in recruitment, and an assessment of the demand and need based on what the partners have learned from the kind of early phase of this work. Finally, an update on DPS. DPS also has some learning centers at their sites. Currently, 215 students are enrolled across their 3 sites with a maximum capacity of 450 students. DPS is receiving $300,000 from the DPS Foundation to further expand student access to sites. And DPS is similarly working on strategies to increase enrollment and to communicate more widely with parents and schools and school leaders to make sure that everyone is aware of learning centers and that we are connecting up our students most in need of this model of support. And that is an update on our 4 initiatives, and we will pause now for questions. Again, we are joined by Susan Amey from Discover Durham, Kurt Ribisil and Pilar, who are associated with our ambassador program, Andre Pettigrew and Brian Smith from the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and Megan Gonzalez-Smith from the Durham Public Schools Foundation to answer questions about these. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for a great presentation, as always. Colleagues, you've heard the update on the 4 programs, and these are programs which you all have supported with funding and are ones that you're aware of, but we wanted to make sure that you all had the latest on these programs. So now I'll ask if there are questions or comments by members of the council or by county commissioners. Commissioner Howerton.
Yeah, just a question around clarification. I asked this question last night about board and was told that it would be clarified today. This is about the ambassadors. Someone asked me, how do they find out about how they can get hired? I know that you mentioned that some people have been hired through El Centro. How do the community access the information about who's getting hired and what's the contact information, something for the community to understand where they go for this conversation?
Thank you. I think I see Dr. Ribisel here, and I think he may be able to answer that question.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. So we're hiring through two places. As you know, Pilar has some health workers who are being hired through her group at El Centro. We're also working through a group called University Temp Services to hire folks, and we've hired several folks through them. We've already hired 4 through them. We're hiring an additional 4 or 5 more. I'll be happy to share that information with Ryan, who can then get it to others about how people can apply to the positions.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because right now I couldn't give them any information about who they needed to contact, and University Temps, is that in Chapel Hill?
It's in Raleigh. Chapel Hill. It has multiple locations. We looked at a number of different ways. Hiring directly through UNC is going to slow things down a lot, and we would still be, it'd be another month before we'd have people hired. So this was the fastest solution. I've also reached out. I have colleagues at NC Central, Dr. Lahoma Ramaki and Dr. Sharice Harrington. I've reached out to them this week to see if they have either students or recent graduates from their community health education program who would be available for working, because we have the ability to hire another 4 or 5 ambassadors.
So the interns, there were a couple of interns that were mentioned. That the interns can come from NCCU or UNC?
Well, we do not. So I should present. So we have a couple of people who I have a co-investigator and a graduate student who works with me. They are the only UNC people, along with the project manager, but the ambassadors are all, as we heard, 5 of the 6 are Durham residents, one's from Raleigh. They are local people for the most part. And that's, yeah, so and they're not really interns. They're a mixture of people working part-time, so 20 hours a week, 25, and full-time, that is 40 hours a week.
So would you, I'd appreciate you sending that information out so that we have access to that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I want to compliment for the ones hired at El Centro. We've been having community health workers since the beginning of the pandemic. So some of them started visiting, and even some of our staff visiting businesses. So we are, some of them were trained before this to visit businesses. So we are transferring some of those community health workers that have been in the community, from the community, to do this work, and we will be bringing other community members to fill those positions. But I can send that too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Howerton.
Before you leave that question, I just want to make a note that both Durham Together for Resilient Youth has community health workers and Communities in Partnership. And both of those are two organizations located here in Durham and weren't included in this. I would love to have them included and to see if there's a way to make a connection, because that would be what I was talking about earlier.
Thank you, Council Member. Other questions or comments at this point on any of the proposals? Anyone else? Commissioner Jacobs.
Well, first I want to say great report, Ryan. You did a great job of just presenting a whole lot of information to us, and really great to see all of the incredible work that has happened in a short amount of time. So I appreciate all of the folks behind the scenes who are really making all this happen. And I'm just really proud of the collaboration that is happening across the city and the county who have funded all of these programs, and the way that we are trying to best address the needs in our community. And as Council Member Freeman said, being creative in our approaches. I'm wondering about the small business loan program, and would love to hear from you about this, Andre, and other folks. Seeing, I guess, what we've been hearing, and this is one of the things that the economic subcommittee said at the Recovery and Renewal Task Force, that a lot of businesses right now are not really wanting to take on loans because they have to be paid back. And that, you know, a lot of small businesses are really just trying to survive, to pivot, adapt, readjust, and even following up on what Councilmember Freeman said about some of the suggestions that Nicole Thompson made about ways that we can help businesses with investments in their air filtration systems as we have to move indoors. So knowing that there is $1.3 million left in the loan program. I mean, the grant program has obviously been great, the money's gone. But knowing that there's still $1.3 million worth of money left in the loan program, my question is, should we look at repurposing that money to be able to support our businesses in other ways with some of the investments that they need to get through the winter, or whatever, you know, PPEs or marketing, or some of the programs that Susan just presented to us, you know, that need funding. So I just would like to hear about that from you all.
Yes, Andre Pettigrew, the Director of the Office of Economic Workforce Development for the city. Thank you for the question, Commissioner. First of all, let me just again maybe give background in terms of where we are with the loan program. Again, just about $500,000 have been distributed in terms of the loan program. There's been $1 million of requests made. Now, again, it's more difficult to sort of qualify for a loan than the grant. And obviously grants are preferred to loans, but there is a market for loans. Again, this loan program, I think has been tailored to address a lot of the issues for those businesses who will qualify and repay. First of all, it's patient capital in that these loans can be written up to 9 years. Second, the interest rate is at 3%. It's below prime. I think the third thing that I think is really important, one of the biggest barriers for minority and women-owned businesses in particular, in terms of qualifying for loans, is the requirement to have collateral or secondary sources of repayment. Collateral and personal guarantees are not required on these loans. These are effectively almost signature loans. Again, I would like to stay the course and would recommend that we stay the course because we think that this is a unique product, not just in North Carolina, but in the country. And again, we just recognize, to qualify for it is a little more difficult than obviously a grant.
Well, thank you. It's good to know that there is, I guess there are more that are in the pipeline then. It sounds like they're being processed, the loan program. So the applications being processed, is that what you're saying?
Yes, so the two things. So first of all, there's demand is reflected by the number of people who have applied. Over $1 million of requests, of which half of that, $500,000 has been distributed out. Again, a number of people did not qualify because they didn't have the revenue. We actually increased the size standards for the companies. We went from $2.5 million to $5 million, and we raised the employment level to 50 employees. Again, those who apply should do it deliberately because it does have to be repaid. But in terms of patient loan capital, this is essentially, I think, the best product that's out there. Banks aren't offering this, and we are. The second thing I'll say is, the lending program has been predominantly driven nationally by the SBA PPP program. And again, that has now settled out. But one of the biggest concerns in that marketplace is the nature of forgivable loans. Those rules have changed. And again, I think it has sort of slowed down the demand for lending in this area. But I'm still comfortable that Durham has the right product for our community.
Okay, and of course, there's now the state hub and DBE loan program. So I won't get into that now, asking you questions about that. But I guess my other question is, do we need to look at expanding the other portion, the grant program, and going back out to the private sector, and getting more and back to Duke and asking for more money for that? Because clearly there's the need for a larger grant program, and could even fund some of the things that were just presented to us by Susan, because we know that we're restricted. I think the CARES Act funding gave us the flexibility to do economic stimulus. Unfortunately, we got so little CARES Act funding in Durham, and we've already spent it all. So what are the possibilities of going back out to the larger community and trying to get more money for grants?
Again, I think that's always been a part of the strategy. So first of all, let me really acknowledge the role that Duke has played as a part of the program. Again, I think it's significant that the county, Duke, and the city have put together this fund. And Duke has been quite flexible. We think it is important, and again, I'm going to link this to maybe a comment that I think one of the electeds raised earlier, and that is, I think it was Commissioner Reckow, the importance of partnering with our corporate and financial communities to join us in this work. I know that Duke has been, as I said earlier, flexible and committed to continuing it. But I think we have a corpus in this fund, roughly $3 million, that is in fact being distributed. I believe there is an opportunity for private sector partners to contribute to the grant portion of this, if not even the loan portion of this. And again, I look forward to working with Geoff Durham, the Chamber, and others to sort of, market the value of this investment and the need for this investment to our broader small business community.
Thank you.
Can I mention one thing just briefly about the ventilation? I believe Commissioner Johnson mentioned this. There's increased role, concern about the airborne transmission, and this is why it's riskier to be indoors in a restaurant, because you're there for a longer period of time and you're often there without a mask because you're eating or drinking, as opposed to a quick shopping trip where you're masked the entire time. But there's some things that aren't that expensive that can be done that you might consider exploring. Here's just a quick picture, if I can just share this. This is a box fan, and one of the key things is getting negative pressure. I just visited my daughter's school that meets in person, and they haven't had a single out case, and they have fans in almost every window, and they're pulling air out. They're creating negative pressure, so they're sucking the air out. Here, in cases, people are putting a MERV 13 air filter, which people can upgrade their filters, which they're a little more expensive than normal filters, but this can create filtration for the particles that are coronavirus size, smaller than PM 2.5 and so forth. But this, the fans can create pressure. You can keep windows open. You may have a little bit more of a heating bill, but it's a smart business, and also promoting outdoor dining absolutely as much as possible. So not just spending $10,000, $20,000 to upgrade entire HVAC systems, but thinking about some of these other systems that could be done much more widely is worth considering.
If it's all right, I'd like to just jump in and say one other thing on that. So we had been working on a proposal, a risk mitigation fund. Part of that was specifically to address ventilation needs and thinking creatively about how we might support businesses in improving the airflow quality, recognizing the increased science around this being an airborne disease. I do think there's a possibility of partnering with, with our ambassadors to have this be one part of the work that they are doing in businesses, is making sure they're aware of the airborne nature of the disease. I like Kurt's suggestion of some potentially low-cost solutions that could help improve airflow quality. So we will continue to work on that and think about steps we might take to help improve airflow quality, especially as we head into winter months, where we'll at least face challenges around continuing to do outdoor activities. So I just wanted to stress that we are thinking a lot about that, and Kurt, I like that idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I do want to just mention that there have been ongoing discussions about continued private fundraising for these, for more grants, or for supporting some of the programs that Susan and the Economic Development Task Force have put forward. And so that's going to continue to be important. I do think the big, I think a big question about the spending $2,500 or $5,000 to upgrade an airflow for a restaurant. I think the big question is, will that be enough to make people come inside to eat? And so is that really an investment that makes a lot of sense? And I think that remains a really big question. So I think that these kind of low-cost solutions, in my mind, really make a lot more sense. All right, other questions or comments, or we'll wrap it up. I see Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to follow up on a few things. There were a number of issues that I would like to address. I really want to be proud of this work, and it's hard when you consolidate it all into one presentation. Actually, I don't have slides that were shown, and the information is kind of discombobulated. And so I can't follow or track. And so I'm having some concerns around being fiscally responsible as a board member on the city side. All of these dollars that are being spent, I'm still not clear how they're being spent and just how we're tracking based on the slides and the presentation I have in Granicus. And the slides and presentation that you shared, Ryan, I think was more in depth, but I would need to go back because there were a number of questions I had in your presentation, acknowledging first that I'm not a minority, I'm a woman of color, a Black woman. And so I really just want to make sure I note that language matters, and that I just wanted to clarify, when you say woman-owned business, does that include Black women or Latino women? Or I mean, how does that break out? Because I'm not sure if you're using the same kind of state and federal guideline, or if you're using something different.
Let me maybe respond to that, Ryan, in terms of the loan fund. Again, I need to be precise and get back to you in terms of your question. Again, there's a question of whether we're double counting women of color. Do they show up in the women-owned business portion or in the minority business portion? Again, I've been away, so let me get back with that specific detail. Nonetheless, I will say that we have tried to make a concerted effort to reach small women and minority businesses who were not able to participate in the federal program. And again, the stats, I think, are strong. We'll get back to all of you with the precise nature in terms of the ethnic breakdown, because I think that's essentially what you're asking, Councilwoman Freeman. Is that correct?
Other things. Yeah, and then there was just a note in the presentation about advertising. It's almost as if the communications focuses only on the message of compliance into the kind of public health sense. And what I'm asking for specifically is how we're developing a plan around communicating so that people actually can develop their plans. So Downtown Durham Inc. work with downtown businesses to develop the eateries, and that's their solution. And how is that coming across through, I guess, Office of Workforce and Economic Development for businesses that aren't downtown, because we're spending quite a bit of money, and I'm afraid that most of it is not going to go in a direction that's going to be beneficial to businesses that aren't downtown, in the same way that they are for the businesses downtown. And then I had a couple other questions as well, because there was multiple presentations in one.
Susan, Amey, is that something you would?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just about to speak up. This is Susan Amey with Discover Durham. The Back on the Bull campaign that Ryan spoke about is, of course, it's county-wide, and in fact, more broad than that even, based on the media outlets that are a part of this. A big focus of that initial communication has been on the 3 Ws and the safety precautions, and encouraging businesses to adopt those safety precautions. But that program is in 3 different phases. And as we've moved into the fall, we've increasingly been focused on encouraging people to get out and do so safely, to engage with businesses. And that program is not specific to downtown. It is for all of them. At the same time, Discover Durham has its own campaign running called Rediscover Durham. We were able to secure some funds through a marketing co-op program with Visit NC that came from CARES Act funding. And that's allowing us to reach out throughout the triangle to encourage people to engage with all of our businesses.
And just a follow-up, noting, so if it's Discover Durham is covering beyond the downtown area, how are folks connecting with the work that you've already been doing? Like, how are they following up through, I guess, similarly with the roundtables? How are folks able to see that who might have missed it?
Well, we have a few different communications channels, probably several actually. One, of course, is the roundtables that we continue to reach out to. We also launched what we referred to as our COVID email, but it's an email that goes out every Tuesday to our database of all partners in hospitality and leisure businesses with the most recent updates, information on the campaigns, information about how to engage. And then some of the social efforts that go on by various entities that are part of this program are also encouraging engagement. One of the things that we've done that's been a key focus of that Back on the Bull campaign has been encouraging people to get to the website, both businesses and residents. And the purpose in that is that we wanted that to be a central hub where people can get information about what's going on.
And is
So
the
we've been
website
trying
like
to
backonthebull.com or something? Like, is it a simple like?
Exactly, yes, backonthebull.com. If you have not visited it yet, please do.
Yeah, thank you. And then just shifting to the conversation around the Hope Learning Centers, I just want to make sure that we're following.
Deidrona, before you leave that, can I weigh in on that same conversation just a second? Next, Susan.
I would yield.
So, thank you. Are we sending out anything in the water bills as far as communication? When we talk about people being on the internet all the time, you know, everybody's not going to do that. I mean, people downtown may do that, but people in the surrounding communities may not do that. So are we sending that information out to households so that they have access to the information?
Mr. Smith?
Yes, Commissioner Howerton, yes. In fact, in this month, the residents should be receiving in their water bill a bilingual insert about Back on the Bull, the campaign, its purpose, and encouraging them to learn about the steps both they can take and that participating businesses are taking. So great idea. And yes, we're doing that.
Thank you. Thanks.
Also, to add on to that, part of our intentionality around making sure we're reaching beyond those who are savvy with online media is to make sure that we're in multiple print publications on TV, radio, and outdoor, like billboards and bus signage, as Ryan mentioned earlier. So that has been a real focus, is making sure that we are not too concentrated around digital media.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just had just a few additional questions on the Hope Learning Center, so acknowledging, I think the city gave about 338,000, and I know that I said it in our meeting when we were having this conversation that that was not going to be enough, and acknowledging that the school year is looking like it's not going to start back up till January at the earliest. I just want to make sure that the folks on the call who are with Hope Learning Centers actually give an update to say what it is happening with students and the number of students and how they're keeping folks safe, because I don't think that the folks in the community are aware or have heard an update since our passing of the funding.
Yes. Hi, this is Megan Gonzalez-Smith with the DPS Foundation. So to answer your question about enrollment, the city and the county will get a full data report from all of the 3 partners from the YMCA, Student U, and Kate's Corner this Friday. Per our agreement with the city and the county, it outlines exactly what will be in those regular monthly reports that we send. So that will have all of the enrollment numbers and attendance. But as of this week, the YMCA has 89 students enrolled out of 150 spots they have available. Student U has 83 spots filled out of 108, and Kate's Corner has 80 out of their 80 spots filled. So they are still continuing to enroll students, and they are working really intentionally with DSS, DHA, DPS, counselors, and social workers to be sure that they're really identifying with those partners students who have the greatest need for these learning centers and helping families enroll. And we are still trying to get communication out there. So we will also share with you all when we share that latest data report, some of the communication materials that have been created in English and Spanish for families, and encourage everybody to help continue to spread the word. We know that families are getting inundated with lots of information, and so we need to keep getting this out there and letting people know about it. So we will share those materials and encourage and welcome anybody to share those far and wide with families who may need them. And there have been no instances so far, not to say that there couldn't be and won't be at some point in the future, but at the partner sites, there have been no COVID incidences so far.
And just noting those are inside, not outdoor, and would also be, I guess, a candidate for those box fans that were suggested. And I just wanted to know if there was a website that you were directing folks to, that you should probably save that, as this is live streaming on YouTube.
So each partner has their own site for the learning centers. So we will, the Student U site, the YMCA site, Kate's Corner, and DPS each have their own. But folks can also reach out to me at the DPS Foundation, and then I can get information about all of the sites to people so they can consider all of those options. And my email, people can reach us at info@bullcityschools.org.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Council member. Colleagues, any more questions or comments on these, on this work? I want to thank Mr. Smith, but I especially want to thank all the people who are here, who are doing the work. It's so important, getting the money to our small businesses, educating our small businesses through Back on the Bull, and encouraging folks through that campaign to patronize our businesses and to do so safely. For our health ambassadors, all of this work is just critically important, and for the Hope Learning Center. So thank you all for being here. All right, colleagues, we have one more agenda item, a brief one. This is an update on the Safety and Wellness Task Force, next steps. I'll just state what I believe the next steps are. First of all, I want to thank our County Commission for your recommendations for the bylaws. We have not formally adopted the changes that you all made yet at our City Council meeting, but we will be doing so very soon. We have very favorable reports from council members on the changes you all have made. And so we're glad to be doing that. And we're also updating, we've advertised already for our membership. And I think the other next step here in terms of next steps beside us joining you all in passing those bylaws, making them the same as yours, is that you all would be advertising for your spots, as will the school board. So I think those are the things that are next. And I just want to know if there are any other comments that people have. Commissioner Howerton.
Thank you, Mayor. I made one other suggestion, was to allow, once the members are selected, to allow the members to select their chairs and co-chairs, given that it's a community led initiative. My recommendation would be to allow the community members to select who they would prefer their chair and their chairs and co-chairs be.
Thank you, Commissioner Howerton. The bylaws that you all have approved and that we've approved call for the appointments of the chair by the chairs of the 3 boards. So that's the current plan as you all have passed, the school board have passed, and we have passed. I think the reason for that is that.
Well, that was.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
So that was when we voted on this the other night. I forget what night it was, but that was one of the recommendations that I made at that time. And the chair suggested we wait until this meeting to have that conversation. I just feel strongly that if it's a community-led initiative, and they have consistently asked us as elected officials to allow them to do their work, for us to give them that autonomy. And I just think that giving them the autonomy, that they are intelligent enough to select who they want their chairs and co-chairs to be. That's my recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I guess what we've customarily done is for those boards that exist over time, that they choose their own chairs. For ones that we start new, full blown, it's been, whether it be Mayor Bell and the Poverty Reduction Task Force, or our appointment of the chairs of the Racial Equity Task Force, or our Confederate Monuments Task Force, things that when we start them new, it's been customary that we appoint the first chairs. And so I think that's why that's been in these bylaws that we've supported, but I'm happy to hear any other conversation.
Mr. Mayor, I would definitely be very supportive of bringing it back to adjust our bylaws and make it very clear for the Community Health and Safety Task Force to select their own chair and co-chair. I just want to note that for each of those task force that you mentioned, there's been a huge community engagement issue identified that we had to recover from because of, I think, just what we're talking about. And so I think it would be great if you give the folks who are on the board, that we select on the board, to select their own chair and co-chair. And I'll be willing to bring it back and have conversations with our city attorney to figure out how to adjust that.
Any other discussion? Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that we have had a lot of success with our last few boards, task forces in particular, where the boards, where the chair, either the mayor or the county commissioner chair or both, have appointed the chairs of those boards. I think it's difficult to ask an entirely, new group of people coming together for the first time with one specific and discrete time-limited task to make a decision about who their chairs would be. For our longer term boards, folks have the opportunity to get to know each other, to learn more about each other and each other's work. And this is a very, specific task where people are just going to be doing this for a couple of years. And I also think it's really important that we get that we appoint chairs from the community who are already experienced in this work, who will be coming in ready to hit the ground running. And I think that the best way to do that is to use the knowledge that we already have with the groups, that community organizations that we've been working with, to figure out who appropriate chairs would be. And when we've done that for the Race Equity Task Force and for the Confederate Monuments Task Force, we've gotten really fabulous chairs and really great results. So I'm comfortable with sticking with the bylaws as they are. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes. So what we're saying is that we want to continue to do things as we've always done and disregard what the community has asked us to do. It's okay. I mean, the people that we select to serve on this committee will know one another basically in the community. And I believe that they will know who can, let's say the chair and co-chair is not the boss of the committee. It's to facilitate the process. So we're doing that top-down thing where the community really pushes back and don't like when we are saying the only people that can appoint the chair, select the chairs and the co-chairs is the mayor and the county commissioner, the chair of the board of county commissioners. Now, we can tell the community that, and I don't think we'll get a good response.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, I think we've heard different opinions on this, and I think this is really up to each individual board in terms of having passed the bylaws. So we'll be taking up the county's recommendations, and we can have that discussion at City Council. And I believe the county and the school board have already passed those bylaws. So I think that's really where this discussion in terms of actual formal decision-making would happen. Clearly not at this group. We don't have that sort of function, but I appreciate the conversation. Thank you, Commissioner Howerton, Councilmember Freeman, and Mayor Pro Tem.
I just have one additional question. I know that there's been conversations about the Race Equity Commission coming online. And I just wanted to make sure that in this body, we had a brief conversation noting that there's no new business listed as an agenda item. It would be good in a future meeting, I guess, to touch or broach that conversation to acknowledge that we're setting up, if we're setting up two separate community race equity commissions, or if we're setting up one. But I do think that it would be a good idea to have a countywide race equity commission as opposed to just the city. And just wanted to make sure I brought that up here. And then I will also just note that I served on multiple boards in the city and on the county. And in both instances, there are always new people who are on the board as they roll in and roll out. But you don't always know each other, but you figure it out. And I think that it gives the group a great opportunity to take some ownership of the work that they have ahead, and acknowledging that we have had really great chairs who've had to overcome that gap of not having a community buy-in from the board standpoint. And so I just want to make sure that I note that I think that it would be worth having a conversation and noting that a shift in just how we do things to make sure that it's not top down is important. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Council Member. Any other comments? All right, thank you all very much. If not, I'm going to appreciate everybody on our staffs and our city clerk who made this meeting happen today. And I want to just thank everybody who's been here with us. It's been a long morning, but we've had a lot of good information. And I'll declare this meeting adjourned at 12:13 p.m.